Do the thing. Hello, everyone. Happy weekend day of assorted nature. It's Saturday for me. But Mark is in the future.
I am. I've just gotten up. It's a lovely day. It's a little hot, but that's okay. How y'all doing? How are you?
I mean, we're going. It's been a busy, well, day, week, month. I mean, what we got to live it up, right? We've got what is this? 9 more days. Well, the United States is still a republic. You got to enjoy it while you've got the time, you know?
Oh, is that for the whatchamacallit, the ceremony to inauguration? Is it called?
Yeah, I would also accept coronation, but technically it is an inauguration.
But
yeah.
That's true. But it's kind of funny. He's not even inaugurated yet, and already he's like threatened multiple democracies, kind of thing. That's a thing.
Mm-hmm.
That's a thing.
It's a little disturbing. Oh, he's gonna avoid World War III. But first, we're gonna conquer all of North America.
Well, the weird thing is threatening Greenland, because Greenland isn't just. I was mentioning this on a stream. I think it was my fundamentalist fails a couple of days ago. That Greenland isn't just Greenland. Greenland is Denmark, and Denmark is part of the EU. So in fact, he hasn't threatened Greenland. He's threatened the EU, which is a much scarier proposition. You know, like Germany, France. You know, all of these countries in Europe. It's actually kind of wild.
It's going to be us and Britain versus the continent again.
Well, I don't think Britain's got its own sort of treaties with you know.
Yeah, that's
Europe
true.
kind
They'll
of thing,
they'll probably sit this one out. I don't know.
or who knows?
It's about time a non-English country burned down the White House, don't you think? It's only fair.
Well, I mean, he threatened Canada as well, which is part of the Commonwealth. So if he takes on Canada as well, then England's going to be in on it on the Canadian side as well as Australia. So we may end up fighting one another, Ember, because we are part of the Commonwealth. So is England or the United Kingdom, and so is a lot of other countries as well as India, for instance. So. He thinks he can threaten these countries like they don't have any allies or repercussions or anything. It's like, wow, you've got no idea about any kind of global politics. Like you've got just literally zero idea.
No,
it's wild.
No, it's like he read half of Teddy Roosevelt's biography. Just big stick. Never mind the rest. I have a big stick.
Right,
yeah.
Yeah. Well, it reminds me of. There was back in the day, there was a Looney Tunes cartoon that ripped that off, and Bugs Bunny was like, talk softly but carry a big stick, and Yosemite Sam was like, well, I talk loud and I carry a bigger stick, and like that's exactly who it reminds me of. The Yosemite Sam going, no, I talk loud and I carry a much bigger stick. That's exactly who it reminds me. And I use it too, is the thing that comes after that, which, did they know the future? Did they know the future? No, I'm joking. I really am.
I mean, cartoons predict the future all the damn time. But we can relax a little bit about the global politics nonsense.
Because... look, I think he's just trying to unsettle people, sort of in. So if you're going to go into trade, if you can make them, that's always been his MO, is to unsettle people before making any kind of deal or trade, because he thinks that it helps him in the trading sphere.
Maybe.
No, that's definitely an action that he does, because even the way that he shakes hand, he pulls people in to unbalance them, kind of thing. Everything is about making people unsettled before he goes in trade.
Oh, but, I believe you that that's what he does. I'm just maybe on the whether it's effective.
Oh, every business he's run has gone out of business. Let's face it. Like, I mean, he's been, his businesses have gone bankrupt so often. That's the thing. Like, obviously, it's not effective, or he wouldn't have gone out of business so damn often. But, I think that's why he's doing it. He thinks he can unbalance a country the same way he unbalances individuals, and it doesn't kind of work like that.
It's almost like he wasn't president before, but whatever.
Yeah.
The good news is we're going back in time tonight before all this nonsense happened. We're going to shit. I forget when this was from. It's from a while ago. It was when Richard Carrier was a young doctor, and it is one of the more famous debates on the theist side of things. I got this from a list by Cam over at Capturing Christianity. It's one of his top 10 best debates of all time, and it's William Lane Craig versus Richard Carrier on whether Jesus even freaking existed. So we're going way back in time tonight, folks.
Yeah. So this is what is your position? I don't think I've ever asked you your position on the mythicist position. So are you part of the mythicist position or not?
I'm agnostic on it, I suppose you might say. There's a lot of compelling stuff on the mythicist side, but as I've often said, it doesn't even matter if it's true, because the fact the theists can't rule it out is pretty damning for their position. Like, if Jesus had actually existed, even as a normal human, it should be the easiest thing in the freaking world to just falsify mythicism. And they can't. So, but also there is some pretty strong evidence. I'm sure Dr. Carrier will get into some of it, but a few of the favorites that I like to bring up when I'm feeling spicy on the subject is, so Jesus was born in Bethlehem, but he's called of Nazareth. Pray tell, where the fuck is Nazareth? Because nobody knows. None of the archaeologists have any fucking idea. Where's the Sea of Galilee? Yes, it appears on maps now because of the Bible story, but it's in reference to a tiny little lake that does not match the description of the Sea of Galilee in the Gospels. So where's the sea? There's a bunch of questions like these, and they're kind of fun.
Well, so in the Lower Galilee region, archaeologists did find a farm that dates around the right time. I don't think that's 100% true. I think that, I don't think that's actually true. I think that Nazareth, while it may have been like more of a village than a town,
there's a conversation to be had on the subject. There are some archaeologists who claim to have found Nazareth in the same way that Ron Wyatt claims to have found Noah's Ark. Although I must admit, these are much more reputable archaeologists, but they are using motivated reasoning to try to find things, which kind of undermines the credibility of their claims. But on the flip side, there's the argument from silence, right? Like, just because we don't know something doesn't mean that something didn't exist. I just throw these things out there to make the theist realize they have no fucking idea where Nazareth is either. And isn't that a problem?
I remember this. There was a article by Bart Ehrman, right, who's hardly a sort of sort of somebody that is on the Christian side saying, hey, Nazareth must exist kind of thing. So there was a guy called, and I do remember this, I have the article somewhere. Hold on a sec. So there was a guy that said, it was Salm, his name was, Rene Salm. He devoted an entire book to the myth of Nazareth kind of thing. Of course, it's significant, but the problem is we've got physical evidence that this place was actually there. Where is it? Pottery found in Nazareth. Salm also claims pottery found on that site is dated to the time of Jesus, is not really from this period, although he's not an expert on pottery. Two archaeologists who replies to Salm's protestation say the following. Salm's personal evaluation of the pottery reveals his lack of expertise in the area as well as his lack of serious research in the sources. So there definitely is, there's a debate to be had, right? Another discovery is made in a year after Salm's book appeared. It's a house that dates to the days of Jesus. Against the again, the principal archaeologist was Yardina Alexandre, director of the excavation at the Israel Antiquity Authority. Pottery remains connected to the house. There's nothing in the house to suggest that it had any wealth at the time. So Associated Press concludes the dwelling and older discoveries of nearby tombs and burial caves suggest that Nazareth was an out-of-the-way hamlet around 50 houses on a patch of about 4 acres, populated by Jews of modest means. I mean, 50 people is not even a town. That's a village. I don't. But
a hamlet even.
Yeah.
Like
so
if a dwelling is that small, like how do we even know that that's Nazareth? You know.
Well,
like, are we finding a location and going, oh, this must be it? You know.
Well, sort of, we look at, where it's located, whether it fits things of it, where it says it is. I don't see a problem. I mean, we certainly can't rule out that there was a place called Nazareth, at this site.
Yeah, but that's not how we. It's a tangent on top of a tangent, and so we're getting started with those early. But like, that's the opposite of skepticism. Is we don't decide things by, well, we can't rule it out. You know, like we have to have a good reason to think it is. But I do digress. The debate. I'm waving things around. Don't mind me.
Yeah, well, I mean, I just wanted to talk. So I'm not a mythicist. I don't believe. I've heard like atheists say in the past, well, the mythicist position completely destroys Christian claims, and I don't think that sort of saying, well, I want to destroy the claim, so I'm going to believe that it's a myth is not is not the right way to go.
Yeah,
I think I generally.
Right.
I think I will generally go for just scholarly consensus, because I'm not a scholar. I can't possibly evaluate this. Now, I'm aware Carrier is a mythicist. He could be right. He could. To me, it's sort of an irrelevant claim, because whether Jesus existed or didn't exist, it doesn't get you one step closer to any supernatural miracles kind of thing. I do like Bart Ehrman. I find that he does do excellent work, and I mean, Carrier does excellent work as well. But I think Bart Ehrman really is more nuanced in his approach of, well, he could have been a myth, he could not be a myth. I'm not taking the mythicist position that he actually was. I think it's more tentative. And when we're talking about history and knowing what happened in the past, I think tentative is better. So I don't know if it was a myth or not. I go with the scholarly consensus that he was a real person, but the scholarly consensus is also that, we don't take these books like the Bible as exact history. We don't say that supernatural things happen just because they were written in a book or people claimed that they happened. So, you know, I know that Carrie has done some excellent work. Like, for instance, somebody put out like sort of a Bayesian study, probability study that, you know, sort of said, well, if, you know, there is a God, then all of this must have happened. And it was sort of this Bayesian study. And then Carrier put out an opposing view that was sort of, well, if you don't assume all of these things in your prior assumptions, then God doesn't exist at all and Jesus didn't exist at all, which was fantastic because it just showed that, hey, depending on what you put in the priors to this Bayesian study, you can come out with the result that none of this happened at all, which was really good. So I think he's done some excellent work. It's just I don't agree with his mythicist position. I don't think we can tell. You know, I don't think we can tell if there was a real person or not.
I mean, if there were evidence that there were, it would settle things. But as you said, it doesn't actually matter because as we've often said, you can just grant, sure, Jesus lived, fine, whatever, for the sake of argument. Mm-hmm. It doesn't, the magic doesn't automatically follow.
Right.
You still got to show me the magic.
And we have this conflation being made when people go, oh, well, the Bible talks about real places and real people. Yeah, it does. Pontius Pilate was definitely the governor of Judea at that time. We found coins with his face on them. He definitely, like, there is no doubt that he existed and was the, you know, ruler on the Roman side of that province during that time. There's no doubt. But that doesn't mean that any of the supernatural stuff happened. You know, it doesn't, there's no reason to think that just because, you know, Galilee was a place and, you know, it accurately describes a lake there and it accurately describes the Roman Pontius there. It doesn't mean that we automatically assume that everything in it is true. It's the black and white thinking.
Mm-hmm. And a very silly black and white too, but
oh details. Yeah. I think Matt Delahunty used to use the example of just because New York is real, we don't assume that Spider-Man exists, kind of thing, which I think is very apt. Yeah. And just because Troy definitely was a real place and it was definitely destroyed, we don't assume that Achilles was invulnerable, kind of thing. And it is possible that Achilles was a real person. We don't know. We don't think so, but it may have been. But even if he was, it doesn't mean that he was invulnerable to arrows and, you know, things like that, that the stories say.
Every claim has to be demonstrated independently of all the other claims. Now, if you demonstrate Achilles did not exist for sure, then it automatically renders his invulnerability thing.
Yes, absolutely. Absolutely. So I think that's why the mythicist position is very... it's very seductive to an atheist who thinks that, you know, it's very sort of, well, you know, all I have to do is show that Jesus isn't real, and then I don't have to, you know, talk about any of the events that happened in Jerusalem. I don't have to talk about any of the sort of resurrection claims. Yeah, it's seductive, but just because something's seductive and an easy path doesn't mean we have to go down that route. Like, I'd rather be honest and say, hey, I don't know if he was a real person than say, hey, I know, and, you know, not be sure. And, you know, from my position, I'm not a scholar. I'm not an expert on you know, the events in the Levant around that time. I don't know. I would rather trust people who are experts. That the problem comes that for so long now, we've had the Christian sort of worldview, if you will, and I hate using that word because it sort of pigeonholes people, but the Christian perspective on these events for so long, it's only been very recently that scholarship has actually veered away from that and being more objectively like, do we actually know this for sure, rather than believing it because all of the universities were religious, which I think is a good thing. But we have to be wary not to, you know, go back the other way.
Yeah. but it's a good baseline to discuss these before we get started, because I mean, I can't imagine William Lane Craig convincing me of anything. We've seen him argue before, but if his case is strong for historicity and Carrier's is weak, I mean, I could be swayed, you know, and vice versa.
Yeah. Well, I think he's a bit out of his depth. I mean, I don't know. William Lane Craig is not a historian. I don't think so. You know, Carrier is definitely a historian, right? His focus is history around the biblical times. So William Lane Craig is a philosopher first and foremost. So I presume that he's going to be trying to settle into some of the great apologist philosophy tropes, like the argument from silence, and, you know, sort of say, hey, but you can't demonstrate that he wasn't real, kind of thing, or, you know, we shouldn't expect, or, you know, try to use some of these philosophical tactics, while Carrier will be going for, hey, we, you know, for any other historical figure, if we don't have evidence for them, we have to conclude that they didn't exist. Yeah, I don't know. I don't know.
It could be, you know, apologetics level bad, or it could be legendary, because while Craig is a philosopher first and foremost, his doctoral thesis was on the historicity of Jesus. So he's got a chance from a philosopher perspective. And we have a couple of super chats. Thank you guys so much. Love seeing you folks in the live chat. I see all you peoples. I see Mark, who's been hanging out since before we even started. John Lovell, and I'm not sure I can pronounce your name.
Not
Lock. Okay. Now that I can see it bigger, it's a little easier. And
it's not in another language. It's just a backwards K, which is awesome.
Yeah,
I love it.
Beheaded Kamikaze. Good to see you all. Aragorn. Hello, everybody. I missed. It's delightful. I enjoy spending the evenings with you fine folks.
Got a couple of super chats as well, darling.
Yes, indeed. We're getting there.
I didn't want you to forget. I'm sorry. I forget. I miss them. People help me. I'm so appreciative because I miss them. So I'm just trying to help.
For sure. No worries. My unfinished journey sends 666. Thank you so much. And says, hail Nero and hail Ember and Mark. If the Jesus of the New Testament were a composite of 2 or 3 real people, would that position be mythicist or historicist?
Historicist.
Well, that does raise an interesting question, because if the character is a literary fiction who's based on multiple real people, like if there's some real people and some fictional figures, like the Canaanite myths that were being drawn upon, for example, at what point does the fiction outweigh the fact that there are real people in the myth to make it not be mythicist? Point.
Well, I think that if there was at least one real person who was Yeshua, because don't forget that Jesus's name isn't Jesus. At the time, it's Yeshua, right? It's actually Joseph, and a variation of Joseph, which was a very common name. So if there was one real person, and maybe there was a few Josephs in the area, or Yeshua's in the area, because don't forget, it was an incredibly common name because of Joseph from the previous iteration of religion. So, or at least that's my understanding. I think that, that would be there was a real person with mythic stories attributed to them. I believe, and, I'm not 100% sure, I could be wrong about this, but I believe that as long as there's sort of one person you're basing events on, it's not a mythicist position. The mythicist position is that this entire thing, including the person, was made up. Like it was just fabricated as a person that never existed, never, was never a itinerant rabbi, never wandered around talking to people. And, so if there was sort of a few of them around, and they got conglomerated into one. As far as I understand it, that would still be historicist position, because even though the events are fake, the person wasn't a myth.
But there isn't the person, because it's a literary figure made of multiple figures. Now, I understand there's a case to be made. We can try to untangle these things, and then we have real people to investigate, several of them. Yes. But the person that they claim to be, I don't know. Maybe they'll settle that in the first few minutes. My Unfinished Journey also sends an additional 222. Thank you much. And says, and hail critical scholarship. And then My Unfinished Sock, who seems to follow My Unfinished Journey around, strangely enough, sends $2 and says, don't be uncritical, like and share the stream. And do please. And also, there's a little button down there that means a whole lot to me. It's called subscribe. If you hit it, sometimes YouTube will let you know when we're doing another show. And then you can join us. And that goes double for you future people. If you're watching later, hit the subscribe and join us live sometime, because we'd love to see you in the live chat and engage with you and talk about things like Aunt Jer says, to answer Ember's pinned comment. I get an ad every time I open one of your live streams. And that's a thing I don't know, because I don't see what anybody else sees. That's why in live, I'm gathering data on ads. I was actually talking with Kat from Skeptic Haven about whether it might be more beneficial to have live streams be non-monetized while they're live, and then turn the monetization on afterward. Because if the commercials just get freaking crazy during the show, because I don't control those, anything you see, YouTube is throwing up. But if I turn monetization off, maybe there'll be less. And so we're doing some science. We're gathering some data tonight.
Yeah, give us feedback. If you are watching this in the future too, leave some comments in the comment section, just saying your experience. If it's annoying you, want to know. I'm so out of it. I've never even thought about it, to be honest with you. I think I just give whatever the default YouTube says, and I just don't worry about it, to be honest with you.
Yeah,
it's okay.
Generally what I do.
Big shout out to Kalasia. So good to see you, Kalasia.
Yeah, Rochelle's here.
My Unfinished Sock.
Skip ads manually. I believe that the caps lock.
Been there, done that. Yeah.
If you have the Control Studio open, it'll bring you up options like saying this may be a good time for an ad, and then you can like approve it or deny it or what. But I tell people to have the Control Studio open, and sometimes I do, but not always, because many things happening. Mark Right-Handed Smith, member for 1 month, appreciate you, says sometimes but not always. That's in reference to YouTube actually sending you notifications. Hitting the bell helps, but I do know that Mark has all notifications turned on and still didn't get a notification, because the YouTube notification demons took the day off, apparently. It's very weird. But we do what we can.
Yep. Well, my position is I don't know whether it was a complete myth, whether it was multiple people amalgamated into one, whether it was one person and a whole bunch of things got assigned to that person. I have no idea, and it's not important. But, it's interesting to see the debate over, because it is an important question. Just because if Jesus was a myth and this person never existed, nobody existed that did any of these things, and it's just some crazy cult that originated, then that's fatal for the Christian position.
Yep. There's a lot to cover in this debate. The good news is it's relatively short compared to some that we usually do. We skipped the intro as per usual. As you know, I want to thank this person for fundraising and this person for bringing Dr. Craig and so on. But they do lay out the format.
Hi, Robin.
Dr. Craig is going to start, because he has the positive position that Jesus was a real critter, and they'll do 20-minute intros, 12-minute rebuttals, 8 minutes rebuttals, and 5-minute closings. And then everything after. There's actually a second part, but the Q&A is separated off into its own part. So good stuff.
And both of these gentlemen really do know how to debate. I will give William Lane Craig that. He's very good at debate. He is. You can't deny it. He's good at debate. His arguments can sometimes absolutely... There's a reason why we call him Low Bar Bill, but he definitely can, do the debate. I definitely think so.
Mark just got his notification.
Oh, yeah. If you didn't know, Mark, there's a stream running you might want to catch,
It's a possibility, but the good news is you haven't missed any of the debate yet. Mark and I had to do our pre-show debate, pre-debate, show, whatever. Well, you all were here. I don't need to explain it to you. Robin Webster, member for 14 months. Hell yeah! Thank you so much, Robin. We love you. Okay, let's get this show on the road, shall we?
Yeah, let's do it.
Good evening. I want to begin by thanking the Philosophy Club for the invitation to participate in tonight's debate. And I also am glad for Richard's willingness to participate.
I would have expected the history to put this on, but it's not. It's the Philosophy Club, which is interesting. The Philosophy Club chose a historical topic. That's very interesting.
Yeah, it makes me wonder. We'll see. We'll see how it goes.
The question before us this evening is, did Jesus rise from the dead? In my opening speech, I'm going to lay out some reasons why I answer yes to this question. And I presume that Richard will lay out his reasons for saying no. Now, there are at least two ways.
That's how it works, Bill. That's the plan. Yep.
If you've never been to a debate before, he does a lot of this. He sort of lays out what he'll do beforehand. Part of me goes, I kind of like it as a debate tactic because you're sort of going, this is what you will expect. And then he delivers on it, giving a lot to his credibility. But part of me goes, well, of course that it's just, of course it's, it's just rhetoric, basically.
Yeah.
To a knowledge of Jesus' resurrection, the existential and the historical. Tonight, I want to focus on the historical case for Jesus' resurrection.
Good plan.
I realize that the vast majority of Christians have not based their belief in Jesus' resurrection on historical considerations, but on a personal encounter with the living Lord himself. And I think that this existential approach is fully legitimate. But I also think that a good case can be made historically for Jesus' resurrection as well. Now, one doesn't come to a study of Jesus' resurrection in a vacuum, so let me lay out very clearly two presuppositions with which I approach tonight's question. First, I presuppose the existence of God, as demonstrated by the arguments of natural theology.
Normally, I would quibble, but for the sake of the debate, I'll just grant that.
Yeah.
Because God existing has no bearing on whether Jesus was real or resurrected.
Mm-hmm.
This is the approach taken by class.
The only thing I can sort of see it having a problem with is Bayesian analysis. So I mentioned it before. Maybe if you don't know what Bayesian analysis or the Bayesian sort of statistics is, it's basically making statistical probability that changes all the time based upon prior assumptions. So you can make probability statements by assuming all of these priors. The problem with that is that if your priors are wrong, the Bayesian study isn't worth crap. It's usually mostly used as a sort of dynamic study for something that changes based upon updating information. But when you have something like, well, there's a God, that prior becomes really, really problematic if you can't back it up. So I get what you're saying. It's a moot point, but if he's using it in a Bayesian sense, I would then want to revisit that. So I basically would say I would conditionally accept that, but we would need to revisit it if any of your evidence hinges upon that being true, because that's begging the question, right? You're putting forth something that has not yet been demonstrated.
Yeah, that's fair. So yeah, let's caveat that with a conditional granting.
Yeah.
Classical defenders of the resurrection, such as Hugo Grotius, Samuel Clarke, and William Paley, as well as by such contemporary scholars as Wolfhard Pannenbach, Richard Swinburne, and Stephen Davis.
Bunch of names. Cool. We could look them up, and I'm sure they have wonderful credentials, but the names aren't enough. That's just authority. You have to like present the thing.
I just want to pause here and give a big shout out to Joe, who's just showed up, the Kentucky Atheist, who gave us both an opportunity to be in a video recently. And if you haven't checked out the Kentucky Atheist, go on and do so. We both appeared in a really cool video about arguments.
It was so fun. It was what was it? 10 silly things that creationists say.
Oh, watching the video, yeah, I was under the pump making it. I had 24 hours to do it. I was
I kind of rushed mine too.
I totally rushed.
Here, Joe, I just threw a wrench at you so you can link the video if you want to. But also subscribe to Joe's channel because he does a lot of cool shit like that. He's got more cool shit planned, and he does regular live streams like with community stuff and bunch of good shit. Subscribe to Joe.
And it's the approach that I've taken in my published work. Now, I realize that Richard doesn't share this presupposition. He's an atheist who denies that God exists. This is a huge difference, which will, of course, radically affect how we assess competing explanations of the facts. But our time and topic are limited tonight, so if we want to debate about the existence of God, we may just have to schedule another debate.
Right.
Second,
Yeah.
No,
that's fair.
Yeah,
no, I think that's fair. Yeah, I think that's fair. I think though, sort of, I've got a funny feeling if he gets a concession on the existence of God, he'll go into these Bayesian studies, and I think that is way too far. Way too far.
Yeah. Well, like I said, we'll see.
Suppose that our background knowledge includes a good deal of information about the historical Jesus, including his radical personal claims, his teaching, and his crucifixion. In so doing, I stand squarely in the mainstream of New Testament scholarship regarding the historical Jesus. Again, I realize that Richard doesn't share this presupposition. Richard takes the extremist position that Jesus of Nazareth never even existed, that there was no such person in history.
I don't like, come on now. It's not an extremist position. It's not like scholarly consensus, but that doesn't make it an extremist position. There is a significant contingent of mythicists in the historical, side of things.
Yeah, and also he's not just low-key poisoning the well, he's also kind of painting the target, if you will. He's shifting the burden of proof is a better way to put it. He's saying that Jesus never existed. That's the implication, but you're the one with the positive position, Bill. You're the one who has to show he did exist. Right. Otherwise, he's justified in saying, I'm not convinced there was a Jesus.
Yeah. No, I get what he's saying. And it's impossible to prove. It's kind of impossible to prove a historical figure did not exist, even ones, like how do you do that? It's very, very difficult to do. Like if you have a story about a certain figure, because we have so little evidence from around that time. I mean, basically, like even we can't be certain that Nazareth existed, like we were discussing earlier. I mean, we think it did, but, when we're talking about history, rarely are they talking about, oh, we know that this figure existed. Like, we know that gravity, does X or whatever like that. It's not this hard science where we can go, okay, well, if you have 2 voltages and apply this will happen. No, that isn't what we're talking about. Really, when we're looking at history, we're really looking at levels of confidence. Like we can be really confident that, Hannibal existed, for instance. We've got multiple scrolls from Roman times about their army having their ass kicked by this guy. But, other figures we're not so certain. It's not, this kind of thing is interesting because I don't think anybody can claim to absolutely know anything, well, on any subject really, but especially history.
Yeah, I've heard, read, experienced a number of talks from historians in different fields, and the one thing historians seem to agree on across all disciplines is that history is the least absolute of all the sciences. Everything is contingent. Everything is, this is the best explanation right now, but there's a huge asterisk that it's always subject to change with the next dig or discovery.
And I think I remember somebody saying you can tell a real historian that knows their stuff by the amount of caveats they put in front of what they're saying. Like, so they will sort of say, hey, this is what we understand, but it could be differently. But, you know, and all of these caveats to what they say, because it really is difficult to work out, you know, what happened.
Yeah, it's really a lot of unraveling. I just finished Dr. Josh's volume 1 because he was going to be on our 30 and 60, which was supposed to be last week, but he had to postpone, and then another and whatever. So he'll be on eventually. But I went through his book, so it would be fresh in my head, so I could talk to him about it, or at least his first book. And yeah, so he does a section on archaeological dig procedure. And even that is freaking fascinating, how they've got different protocols and whatnot so they can map where each individual pottery shard was in 3 dimensions. And oh, it's so cool. But I do digress.
Position, which is so extreme that to call it marginal would be an understatement. It doesn't even appear on the map of contemporary New Testament scholarship. So I'm also very safely situated with respect to my second.
I think you know, number one, that's not true. Number two, I think that position has shifted over the years. I don't think there are more mythicists in history out there, you know, in the history community out there. It isn't a massive position, but you know, I think he's trying to really frame it as there's almost nobody out there that's a mythicist, and that just ain't true, sir.
Very much so. But do remember, this is from quite some time ago. I mean, Bill is younger. Dr. Carrier is like barely post-grad, and I mean, this is before, you know, David Fitzgerald was on the atheist experience, before he'd even written his books, and you know, John Gleason started doing his thing, and the Christus app. There's been so much progress in mythicism, and yeah, so it at the time it actually was a much smaller thing.
Well, but I think that there still was enough people that, you know, it wouldn't be you know, he's really exaggerating on the you know, size of the community of mythicism here. I mean, it definitely isn't the majority position. It probably isn't, you know, a huge position. It's definitely a minority position, but I don't think it's as tiny as he's trying to make out here. I mean, there was who was it? Robert M. Price sort of saying it, and you know, he's been saying it since, when was this? Like 80s or something? Is that what we're talking about?
Oh, let me see. I don't think it's that far back. Okay. But I will see if I can find a date on this here somewhere.
Early noughts, or because I mean.
Okay, that's no help. As I mentioned at the very beginning, I got this and several others from a list that Cam at Capturing Christianity put out, but there's no dates on that. So let's just try Googling it directly.
Oh, that's okay. It's not really important. It's just, you know, there has been a significant, I mean, significant's such a loaded word. There has been a mythicist position for a long while that hasn't been as insignificant as he's making it. Yeah, no, it definitely was a position that they, you know, was definitely debated over, argued over. It's not as insignificant as he's making out. You know, like not even on the map. Oh, it definitely is on the map, sir. You are just trying to, you know, this is just poisoning the well.
Yeah. But also, you know, as you were saying, and as we've mentioned previously, a lot of people in these discourses, they don't actually care, because It doesn't matter if there was a real Jesus. It's why bother defending the extra position when you can just grant Jesus and say, but prove miracles, though, because that's the part we're actually interested in anyway.
Yeah. Well, I think that for some people, and I've spoken to them before, other atheists, they think that if you can defend that position of Jesus not existing, then you don't have to bother with any of the miracle stuff or any of the apologetics from then onwards. If you can just stick to your guns on that one, then everything else falls apart for Christianity. And I get the lure of that. I really do. It would be easy to say, hey, well, if we just all stick to that one, just say, hey, Jesus was a myth. But, I want to know, like, I would rather believe what is true than what is convenient. I'll put it that way.
Yeah, for sure.
That, not to say that Jesus is a myth isn't true. I don't know. But unless I do know, I'm not gonna take that position. I would rather be unsure about that, argue about the evidence of miracles, and at least be a bit more honest about it.
Well, I think there's something else to be said on the subject, because at some level, by anybody who isn't a Christian is effectively de facto arguing that the Jesus in the Bible stories is a myth, whether there was a real person who was then, legendified afterwards. There's a disconnect there. Like the one who's in the stories is definitely a mythical, so it's really just a slightly stronger position of what we're already saying.
And it's weird because, like, the Bible definitely, no matter what position you come from, it has mythology in it. Like, this is the thing, the historians and what William Lane Craig obviously leaves out, which is weird to see him take this tact, because the scholarly position on whether the Bible is true is that it is mythology. That is the consensus. And it's a tiny minority that says, oh, the events actually happened, kind of thing. It is mythology, right? So when the battle, there was a battle in the Bible, I can't remember which one, I do apologize, but the sun stood still for 24 hours until the battle could finish. That God made the sun stand still. Like, that would require stopping the earth from spinning, right? We know what the sun's not just moving across the sky. Don't listen to the flat earthers. That is not happening. You would actually have to stop the earth from spinning. So that is mythology. That's all it is. But obviously, when the scholars go to William Lane Craig goes to say whether these miracles happen, then he will not appeal to scholarly consensus that it's mythology. When he actually goes to that stuff, then the book is historically correct all by itself, which I think is a bit of a double standard. Is my audio playing up?
I was going to ask about that because I wasn't sure if it was just me or so. I've been like closing tabs and shit to try to reduce my CPU usage in case it was.
Okay.
It wasn't so bad that I had to interrupt you.
I apologize, gang. I'm sorry. Just give me one second. Okay. Let's see if I can fix this.
While he's working on that, I want to remind everybody that Mark and I take turns hosting these every other week. We're over on his channel, Mark Reed Atheism, linked in the description. Make sure you're subscribed there so that you can watch both. We do a lot of part twos. This one may not be, we'll see, but sometimes to catch both parts of any given debate, you got to go to each channel. So yeah, make sure you're subscribed on both. And also,
okay, how does this sound? Is this better?
Much better.
Do you hear me now? Okay.
Yes.
Awesome. Sorry about that, folks. I had no idea. Yeah, please do let me know if that happens, please. I cannot hear myself, strangely enough.
I know. It's that's why I had no idea that my voice filters were being weird. I had one that I was using to block out background noise because I've got my heaters all running and shit. And it went haywire just before the earlier show today. And
Mhm.
apparently it like skewed how my voice sounded, and then my camera, it just tech stuff. It's fun. All right, let's continue before I start doing Patreon ads.
Okay.
Presupposition. In tonight's debate, then, I propose to defend two major contentions. One, there are four historical facts which must be explained by any adequate historical hypothesis: Jesus' burial, the discovery of his empty tomb, his post-mortem appearances, and the origin of his disciples' belief in his resurrection.
Well, that's going to be
That's
Joe called it. He's just going to presuppose the miracles and stand on that.
Yep. Yeah. Yeah, no, it absolutely is, and so I'm not sure he's doing the right thing by just appealing to one book kind of thing. Like because all of this is in the same sort of text, and you can sort of say, hey, but there were four gospels, yeah, but that, you know, we know that Luke was copied heavily from Mark. We know that Matthew was copied heavily from, like, you know, there's a problem here, right? Like, you're just leaning on one or you know, what possibly could be a couple of documents.
Yeah, I mean, calling these historical facts hurts my head, because even the freaking gospels don't agree on
right.
Well, the burial possibly, but the other stuff, no.
I think that calling these historical fact is really dishonest, you know, because because the scholar, he's sort of appealed to the scholarly consensus that Jesus wasn't a myth, but now he's saying these are historical facts, which historians, the consensus is not that, you know, these are historical facts, that Jesus was buried in an empty tomb. You know, he's sort of saying, hey, the empty tomb is a historical fact. No, it isn't. No, it isn't. In fact, there's a lot of, even if Jesus wasn't a myth, right, that you don't take the mythicist position, the tomb burial is very strange for an itinerant rabbi, right? Tomb burials were usually for very important people. And, you know, obviously who paid for the tomb? They're very, very expensive. I don't know. It's very strange.
Theoretically, it was another Joseph. I want to say Joseph of Arimathea, but I think I think that is him. It doesn't matter. But there's bones to pick about whether he was even a rabbi, because do recall there's that section in Matthew where he heals the leper and then tells the leper to go see a rabbi to offer a sacrifice.
Right.
Which shows that Jesus himself didn't think he had the holy authority to even do rabbi level stuff. Details though. But it's so weird. But I mean, what could possibly go wrong? I'm sure Dr. Carrier isn't going to completely shred this bullshit.
Yeah.
But we're going to have to wait a while for it, because you can't respond to your opponent's opening until after your own opening, and then they get a rebuttal.
And two, the best explanation of those facts is that God raised Jesus from the dead. Let's look at that first contention more closely. I want to share four facts which are accepted by the large majority of New Testament historians. Fact number
New Testament historians, not
right.
historians who study the New Testament. Yes. Careful wording there, Bill.
Number one, after his crucifixion, Jesus was buried by Joseph of Arimathea in a tomb. Scholars have established this fact.
Hooray! I was thinking of I got my wires crossed, because I was thinking like Joseph of Arimathea is also apparently one of the possible people who made off with the Holy Grail, and I'm like, no, that's a Grail person. No, that is the tomb person. Why not?
No, that is a tomb. Yeah.
On the basis of evidence such as the following: one, Jesus' burial is multiply attested in early independent sources.
No.
Independent sources? What other sources does he have apart from the Gospels?
I mean, yeah, what do we mean by early? A, but B, there's Mark, which is literally it in form, function, content, style, everything it is a fictional tale. It may be recounting a real story, but doing it in a fictional way, sort of like a dramatization of a biography. But it checks every damn box for a fictional legendary story. And then the other three gospels definitely copied off Mark. So where's any original source? It's wild.
Yeah.
The burial account is part of Mark's source material for the story of Jesus' passion. This is a very early source, which is probably based on eyewitness testimony and dates to...
And Mark, the original ending of Mark ends with, and they told no one. What eyewitnesses?
Within a few years of Jesus' crucifixion. Moreover, Paul...
And another problem with Mark is that we know from the long ending of Mark that the early church added stuff to it, because we had all of these manuscripts, then found earlier manuscripts that didn't have some of the stuff that was written in it. So I believe it's Mark 16, 9-20 was definitely added later. And that's a problem, because what else was added, we just don't know. So all of the Pentecostal stuff about handling snakes and, if you drink poison, you won't get sick, all of that was added to this document. So appealing to Mark, it's not a reliable document for a couple of different reasons. It's not.
Yep, a lot going on.
The Church of Corinth also cites an extremely early source for Jesus' burial, which most scholars date to within a few years or even months of the crucifixion. Independent testimony to Jesus' burial by Joseph is also found in the special sources behind Matthew and Luke and in the Gospel of John. Historians consider themselves to have hit historical pay dirt when they have two independent sources for the same event. But we have the remarkable number of at least 5 independent sources for Jesus' burial.
They're not independent. They're not independent. We know that they copied off Mark.
Which are extraordinarily early. 2, as a member of the Jewish Sanhedrin that condemned Jesus, Joseph of Arimathea is unlikely to be a Christian invention. There was an understandable hostility in the early church toward the Jewish leaders. In Christian eyes, they had engineered a judicial murder of Jesus. Thus, according to the eminent New Testament scholar Raymond Brown, Jesus' burial by Joseph is very probable, since it is almost inexplicable why Christians would make up a story about a Jewish Sanhedrist who does what is right by Jesus.
Except for the fact that making up things for the purpose of saying no one would dare make this up is exactly how storytelling has been done for thousands of years.
For these and many other reasons, most New Testament critics concur with Dale Allison's verdict that all in all, it is highly likely that Jesus' corpse was placed in a tomb by Joseph of Arimathea. Fact number 2. On the Sunday after the crucifixion, Jesus' tomb was found empty by a group of his women followers. The wide majority of scholars also concur with this fact. Here,
no, what? No, what?
Nope. You lost the thread, Bill. I'll quibble on the details, but I'll grant you the damn burial, because if he lived, he died. If he died, he's buried somewhere, and I don't really care where.
Right. But the empty tomb, we say that, hey, these documents say that they found the tomb empty, but they in no way say, oh, it's a fact that they did. And there's problems between the documents of who found the tomb.
Yeah, which people, who came, how many, what time, what did they bring, and was the tomb actually empty? Because according to some, there was a dude inside. According to some, there was an angel inside. Another one has 2 angels. What was in the tomb? Who the fuck knows?
That's having a dude in the tomb or angels in the tomb is a weird definition of empty. And because it varies from text to text, there's a problem there. And sort of William Lane Craig goes apologist mode by saying, hey, it was from different perspectives. So anything from different perspectives definitely will vary kind of thing. And it's like, yeah, that's why we don't take eyewitness testimony as very reliable evidence, because there's always different perspectives.
Yeah. It's like me saying, I saw Mark here on this channel, and Joe saying, no, I saw Mark over on Robin's channel, and Anarchic Fox saying, no, I saw Mark over on Dapper's channel. I mean, collectively, maybe we could all agree Mark existed, but people would have reason to doubt because we're not seeing the same thing in a way that confirms the thing we're saying. It's
right.
Fuck. This is a little infuriating, but I mean, we kind of knew this was going to happen.
Yeah.
Majority of scholars who deny the fact of the empty tomb. He claims that the empty tomb story is a fictional literary creation of Mark. But the reasons which have convinced most scholars of...
Point of order, it doesn't have to be a fictional literary creation of Mark. It could be a creation of Paul or Peter or whoever the fuck Mark got the idea from.
Yeah.
He could have just taken it and said, hey, this would make a good legendary epic. It doesn't have to be Mark.
What you've got to remember when he keeps saying Mark, the reason why he's appealing to it is because that's the earliest document that we've found. But keep in mind that that document of Mark, even the most conservative estimate has it dated between 70 to 79 CE or AD, whichever one you want to use. So, you know, so the claim that Jesus died in a 33-year-old, obviously, like it's definitely at least 40 to 50 years after these events, right? That people didn't write it down, or this wasn't the first document to be written down. So, you know, can you imagine something happens and then 40 to 50 years later, we write it down? How accurate is it going to be?
Yeah, it's like my grandchildren writing the story of how I graduated high school. Like,
yeah,
what do they even know about it, you know?
Well, it may have been written contemporary to some of the people that lived. Was it Mark? We don't know. Like, we honestly don't know. And it's doubtful that was even Mark that wrote it. Was it Luke that wrote Luke? We don't know, because we don't have the originals. We don't know when the originals were written. Even if it was 10 years after, that's a significant amount of time as far as people's memories go as to what happened. And did the church insert any other stuff in there like an empty tomb? We don't know. We have no idea, because we don't have any originals.
Which is pretty weird in and of itself.
Uh-huh.
Of the historicity of Jesus' empty tomb also go to refute Richard's hypothesis. One, the historical reliability of the burial account supports the empty tomb. If the account of Jesus' burial is accurate, then the site of Jesus' grave was known in Jerusalem to Jew and Christian alike.
Cool. Show me. If it was a known location that was very important to this huge sect of people who still exist today, and the Jews knew too, then you should be able to show me where it is, shouldn't you, Bill?
Funny that.
He can't, though, because nobody knows where the fucking tomb is.
Yeah. And people thought they found the tomb, and it turns out not to be the tomb. We can't find this tomb.
Yeah.
You know, do you think the Christians have looked? Oh boy, have they looked. They have scoured the area for any sign of Jesus's tomb and can't seem to find it.
I'm kind of surprised somebody didn't interpolate somewhere in the 1st or 2nd century something along the lines of, because Jesus was so humble, his tomb got repurposed and was donated. Maybe Joseph of Arimathea wound up using it after all, whatever.
Right.
Like, the fact there's no excuse for why they don't know where the tomb is freaking crazy.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know.
In that case, it's a very short inference to the historicity of the empty tomb. So long as a corpse lay interred in Joseph's tomb, a Christian movement in Jerusalem, founded on belief in the resurrection of Jesus, would never have arisen. Two,
Wouldn't it though?
I would.
Because if people believed Jesus was sacred and there was a tomb and it was still sealed, why would they like normal people don't go breaking into tombs to see if their holy leader's body is really in there, you know?
But and here's the thing, it's kind of like that. Well, if Xenu didn't blow up people and souls went down to inhabit people's bodies on Earth, then we wouldn't have Scientology. Like, people wouldn't believe in Scientology if that didn't really happen.
If it's not true, why do people believe it?
Right. Like, this is the thing. People will believe all kinds of nonsense. It happens. People, you know, it's sort of like you can do that with any religion. If Muhammad didn't split the moon in half, then people wouldn't have believed in Islam and it wouldn't be so big today.
Exactly what I was thinking.
Yeah. It really is that sort of just appeal to popularity kind of thing. Like, oh, people believe it, therefore it must be true. No, that's irrelevant if people believed it or not, especially when they're sort of people who don't really understand much about the world around them and scientifically. Like, Bill, what is this? Seriously?
As I often say, you can't prove that the moon wasn't twice the size it is today before Muhammad split it.
It's like that argument you hear that says, oh, well, you can't explain, if the resurrection didn't happen, you can't explain why Christianity got so popular. And it's like, well, like the ideas that it espoused, like, for instance, take care of your community, love thy neighbor, all this kind of stuff was very, very different to anything around at the time. Maybe it's just people liked that about it. You know, they liked the idea of that it was proposing. It doesn't need to be real in order for people to believe in its message. And people still do believe in its message, you know?
Yeah. I mean, there's people who say that accepting the message of Christianity changed their life. And there's something to that because they started to think about other people. I need to be the good Samaritan. I need to care about my neighbor. They start doing good things. And lo and behold, their life takes a whole different direction. Yeah, that shit can happen. Not because of a magic undead carpenter ghost, but because you're actively trying to be a better person.
Right. And so that the argument that I would make for that one is that, hey, maybe it was a better idea than what was around at the time. It doesn't need to be true to be a better philosophy. So if you've got like the Romans believing in Mars, the god of war and things like that, and worshipping stuff like that, and you think it's better for you that people take care of one another, you know, instead of worshipping Sol Invictus, you might go for something that's more in line with your principles. And that could be the reason. You don't need supernatural deities for that. All you need is better ideas. And I think that if we did still have adherence to the Roman pantheon, I think we'd be a bit horrified by what they do today. I think that had certainly a lot of problems, you know, like some real issues with what they used to do. But at the same time, we would have some real issues with what the early Christianity would do as well. So, you know.
Yeah. And actually, you raise a really good point by bringing up the Roman pantheon and whatnot. Like, Christianity always had a little bit of a tough time amongst the Jews because Jesus's version of Christendom is heretical Judaism. And it was obviously heretical. Paul's version is very different from what Jesus actually taught, as we see in Paul's letters. And that's another thing I'm sure Dr. Carrier is going to bring up, so I won't get too deep into the weeds on that. But Paul is preaching to the Romans who live in a world where you do just choose which God you want to follow based on its teachings and tenets and message. That was the culture. As you said, I think Zeus Jupiter looks kind of strong and powerful and whatever. Or you're like, no, screw that guy. I want to hang out with this Dionysus dude. He knows how to party. Or I want to heal. I'm going to study from, the priests of Apollo or whatever. You choose your God based on what you want. And here's Paul running around going, love your neighbor, man.
Yeah.
So it's a possibility.
The empty tomb is multiply attested in independent early sources. Mark's passion source didn't end with Jesus' burial, but with the story
No,
of the empty
it's
tomb,
not.
which is tied
It's
to the
not, though. A lot of the things that he's talking about are historians saying, oh, there's a bunch of Christians, they believe that Jesus rose from the dead. Like, you know, Josephus said something to that effect, and so did Tacitus. Said, yeah, there's a bunch of Christians running around who believe that Jesus rose from the dead and left an empty tomb. That isn't an Aztec, that isn't a historian saying the event happened. It's saying, hey, there's a bunch of lunatics running around that think that happened.
Yeah, minor difference there. You know.
Well, minor. You're not sure about that one, Chief.
Burial account, verbally and grammatically. Moreover, Matthew and John rely on independent sources about the empty tomb. Jesus' empty tomb is also mentioned in the early sermons, independently preserved in the...
Wait. Are they relying... First of all, they are copying from Mark. There's like cut and paste sections. But are they relying on independent sources? They're not themselves independent sources. And where are these sources? And how do we know? And etc.
Okay, it looks like people just got an ad. So we're at the about 1 hour mark, I think. So roughly about 1 hour in, we got an ad.
Yeah, thank you. We're collecting data.
Yep.
I appreciate you folks.
Thank you for the data point.
The Acts of the Apostles. And it's implied in the very old tradition handed on by Paul in his first letter to the Corinthian church. Thus, we have multiple early attestation of the fact of the empty tomb in at least 4 independent sources. Therefore, it can't be a Markan literary creation, as Richard imagines.
So, I also want to bring up something totally unrelated, but it has bearing. Peter Pan, J.M. Barrie, famous literary work. Would it surprise you to know that it exists in the same extended universe, the literary universe, as Treasure Island? Because it does. Because that was a thing. There's mention of Long John Silver in Peter Pan. Because the two authors were friends and they decided they were going to do that. And authors did that. Now, this was the Victorian era, so it's a little bit removed from the time of the crucifixion. But the reason I bring it up is because it's not uncommon for entirely different people to write the same fictional world. Sorry. It's, you know, it's a possibility.
Yeah.
3.
Especially if they're in the same religion.
Yeah. I mean, if that's the thing, yes, the Jesus cinematic universe.
Nuts. Don't suggest that to them, Joe. They will absolutely do it. We've got enough bad Christian movies as it is without, you know.
Yeah, I was just thinking. Turns out God's Not Dead is a secret prequel to Left Behind.
Well, no, it's going to be like the Avengers, but it'll be the Redeemers or something like that.
Oh,
you
no.
Know, like, you know, Bible man out the front. No. Please, no.
Empty by women. In patriarchal Jewish society, the testimony of women was not highly regarded. In fact, the ancient Jewish historian Josephus says that on account of their boldness and levity, women shouldn't even be permitted to serve as witnesses in a Jewish court of law.
Well, that's not just Josephus's opinion. That was actually the Jewish law. You can't have a woman be a witness. Like, you need multiple women. And it's interesting that the different gospels have multiple women acting as eyewitnesses, but they don't agree on which women. Very strange.
Right.
Now, in light of this fact, how remarkable it is that it is women who are the discoverers of Jesus' empty tomb. Any later legendary account would certainly have made male disciples, like Peter and John, discover the empty tomb.
Except, as many have pointed out, and I'm sure Dr. Carrier will get to, because we see him taking notes like he should.
Yep.
That would not be more believable, because the reason they went to the tomb was to do the spicing of the body and the other post-mortem rituals, which are traditionally a woman thing to do.
Yep.
If the men went, no one would believe it, because it wouldn't make any sense.
The fact that it is women rather than men who are the chief witnesses to the empty tomb is best explained by the fact that they were the discoverers of the empty tomb, and the gospel writers faithfully record what for them was an awkward and embarrassing fact. 4. The story is simple.
What was it embarrassing to the writers? What?
I don't understand how that's awkward and embarrassing. Because
I don't know.
later on, the women go and get the men, and then they like come and see the risen Jesus, even though it doesn't look like Jesus, or they don't see Jesus or something like that. It gets really weird. But they go and grab the men, and then the document sort of says, well, the men saw Jesus risen as well. So that point is moot, and I think that way more it points to, hey, if the men were going to the tomb, why would they be going? There's no reason.
Yeah, the whole premise is the women come get the men, and then the men, like exactly what you would say if you were making this up. Like, yes, it was women first, but then they got men to come verify it, you know?
Oh, yeah, that's right. Mighty Philbert's right. It depends on the gospel, because the one of the gospels says that they didn't tell anybody,
like
because
we
they were
mentioned
so
earlier,
scared.
the original ending of Mark ends with, and they told no one.
Yep, and the other gospels say that they went and told the men immediately, kind of thing. Yeah, no, I get you.
Yeah, John has the Gospel of John is just freaking amazing. You know that. Well, it was still dark. The women went to the tomb. It's so epic. I mean, it's the gospel where we get super Jesus anyway. So of course it's going to be, a really cinematic story. But the women come back and tell, oh, the disciples, we have to come, and it's John and Peter. They take off running, they're racing for the tomb. And John gets there first, but he's out of breath because he ran too hard. So Peter beats him inside. It's a whole thing. I'm like, why? You don't need to go through all this. You could just say, and then the women brought the men and they looked.
Yeah.
And lacks theological embellishment. Mark's empty tomb story is uncolored by the theological and apologetical motifs that would be characteristic of a Christian creation. For example, it's remarkable that in Mark's account, the resurrection of Jesus is not.
Do we have Christian creations to compare it to, or to even synthesize a baseline of what is a hallmark of a Christian creation of the era? Because I don't think we do.
Well, I mean, it depends. Like, if you take the Gospel of Thomas, for instance, and sort of say, hey, that's a apocryphal, what's it called? Apocryphal.
Yeah, apocryphal is the various
apocryphal gospel,
but also heretical.
Well, yeah, but sort of, I think that's what he's sort of saying. But I mean, it's sort of saying, hey, it's not as outlandish as some of the other made up stuff.
Sure, but you can't say that this is from, it's super early. It's from within the lifetimes of people who could have conceivably been there, and then compare it against stuff that you yourself are arguing is from 200 or 300 years later. Of course, it's not going to be like the writings from 200 or 300 years later. If you want us to grant you this date, like we do not write like Charles Dickens did, and that's only half the time difference,
Yeah. And I think that sort of saying, hey, because this isn't as outlandish as some of the other tales that were made up, doesn't make it true, right? Like, you can't just say, hey, it sort of, it isn't the same kind of made up as this made up, therefore it's not made up. Like, that isn't a thing.
Yeah, it's a very strange argument.
It's not actually described at all. Contrast later forged gospels in which Jesus is seen emerging from the tomb in glory to a multitude of witnesses. In Mark's account, there's no proof from prophecy cited, no mention of Jesus' descent into hell, no.
Wait.
Yeah.
No prophecy? Did Bill just concede that there's no prophecy about this? Interesting tactic.
Well, it's interesting tactic, but also like it fits with what we know about myths, that they grow over the telling. And there's nothing weird about that. That doesn't mean that the originating event is described accurately. That's the thing. Like, you can't say, hey, we know that all of these got, blown up into this massive mythology of Jesus going down to hell and coming back up. That doesn't mean that the originating event is accurate.
Yeah. You
especially
seriously telling me this dude's taking a trip to hell? Like, that
Especially-
wasn't even a thing at the time.
Especially since this document is 40 years after the event. Like, how can you possibly say, well, then it accurately describes it and hasn't been blown, like exaggerated in any way? He can't know that. Does he know for sure this hasn't been exaggerated in the 40 to 50 years since the events were purportedly happened? Absolutely not, he can't. But he's sort of saying, hey, because it isn't the same as exaggerations 100 years later, it can't be exaggerated at all. What?
Yeah, it's such a super weird tactic. Like, one thing I'm sure Richard is probably going to bring up is the differences between the Gospels and what Paul says, because Paul will note certain details that contradict what's in one or more of the Gospels. He will seem to not know things that are very well explained in the main resurrection story in the Gospels, almost like they're not even talking about the same Jesus. And the reason that's relevant to the mythicist position is because once you debunk the Gospels, which is relatively easy, 3 of them copy off the first one, and the first one is clearly a fictional tale, so none of them are reliable. Well, now you go to Paul's letters, and in fact, those are slightly better because they are considerably earlier, because Paul was running around just a few years after.
Yes, but
what Paul says doesn't fit with what we do think we know about Jesus. So we have a problem.
And Paul wasn't there. Paul wasn't there at all. That's the problem. Paul came along later, after he died. Paul never met a Jesus in the flesh, as it were. He never met Jesus while he was alive. And apologists would go, oh, yes, but he met him after he'd been raised. He didn't see Jesus. He saw a light and heard a voice. That is completely different than being there when these events happened.
Yeah, they're so much fun, and I'm sure Dr. Carey is going to get into a bunch of it.
Yeah, he's
going to start his pretty soon.
So appealing to the Pauline epistles and all of that kind of stuff, it really is that is not a person with any direct knowledge of these events occurring. Like, that is somebody just writing stuff down that he believes happened and people told him happened.
Yeah. Yes, his discussions with the eyewitnesses, which is another fun one.
Who are the eyewitnesses? Are they credible at all? How many were
I have
there?
here a list of names.
Apparently.
Yeah,
exactly 500.
Well, another fun thing that I got from David Fitzgerald is Paul says 500 witnesses, but Luke says 120. Which one is the inerrant one? Details. It's all details.
Heralding of a new eon, no description of or reflection on the resurrection body, not even any use of glorious titles for Christ. At the very most, the critical historian would want to excise from Mark's account the angelic figure as an embellishment. And what remains is stark in its simplicity. Mark's story has all the earmarks of a very primitive tradition.
Okay. Hold up. So a modern historian would want to excise that, yes, a modern historian. But we've got to remember that people in that day and age, they all believed in supernatural occurrences. It wasn't like in order for this to be credible, we got to take out the gods and angels and demons and spirits and, all of this kind of... No, that was completely normal for the day. people all believed in that stuff. If not sort of Yahweh and the Israel gods, they believed in some gods or spirits or something supernatural, because there was so much they couldn't explain. So the idea that a historian would take that stuff out to be more credible is a really weird statement to make, because that wouldn't make him more credible.
Yeah, that's a really good point, because it's not a criteria that people would take points off of a story for.
Right.
I mean, every damn story that was propaganda about the sitting Caesar included supernatural bullshit, you know?
Yep. Or people claimed some kind of descendancy from gods. You know, they were descended from Hercules, you know, was often said in the Spartan sort of, you know, propaganda, if you will, that they put across, that they were descendants of Hercules and, you know, descendants of this great king who was a descendant of the god. All of that stuff happened all the time. So the idea that a historian back in that day would say, well, I better not put anything supernatural in it, that would look ridiculous. No, that wasn't a thing back then.
Yeah.
Of theological and apologetical reflection. This tells powerfully against Richard's hypothesis of Markan literary creation. 5, the earliest Jewish polemic presupposes the empty tomb. In the 28th chapter of Matthew, we find a Christian attempt to refute the earliest Jewish polemic against the resurrection. What were Jews saying in response to the disciples' proclamation, he is risen from the dead? That his tomb still contained his body there in the hillside? That the disciples were crazy? No, they said the disciples stole away his body.
Is that what they said? I think they said, we don't believe you, but, you know.
Yeah. Well, what's he talking about? He's talking about, which did he say? He said, which gospel was it?
The gospel where people said that the disciples stole the body? None of them.
Yeah, because it wasn't.
And none that I've read, anyway. That's one of the excuses that the apologists trot out, is like, well, I mean, everybody knew where the tomb was, and if it weren't empty, they could have just verified it. So it clearly was empty. So they had to come up with excuses about why it wasn't empty to avoid saying Jesus was obviously resurrected and the disciples stole the body as the thing.
No,
Except no, because nobody knows where the tomb is.
There's something that triggers my memory about this. It is Matthew. He's talking Matthew, right? So I'll go to KJ. Well, actually, Bill's probably more an NIV guy, right?
I'm not sure.
Maybe. It probably doesn't matter to him. So I'll just go for NIV. But it wasn't that they said the disciples stole the body. It's that Matthew says that, oh God, how did it go? Matthew says that people paid the guards to spread a story that they stole the body. I think, right? So Matthew and none of the other gospels has this in it, right? This sort of account that this bribery went on kind of thing. So it's kind of a bit unbelievable, because it's almost like like the Matthew obviously is not one of the earliest gospels, right?
Matthew is the revised Mark, because there were so many plot holes in Mark. The person who wrote Matthew felt the need to write to do a reboot in order to plug some of the plot holes. That's very clearly Matthew's intention, is to take this obviously legendary story and try to make it literal by making some of the things that don't make sense make sense.
Yeah, so
it was Matthew 28. Apparently, the chief priests and elders met and decided to bribe soldiers who were there for some inexplicable reason a large sum of money. The religious leaders tell the soldiers to say that Jesus' disciples stole the body. The religious leaders promise to protect the soldiers when the Roman governor comes after them for letting the disciples steal the body they're supposed to be guarding. The soldiers take the money and did as they were told. and spread the lie, and somehow weren't executed for failing at their one job and somehow suddenly having largely inflated bank accounts.
Yeah. Yeah, so it's this whole thing of did the soldiers actually say this thing? We don't know. Did people say, hey, you guys probably just stole the body? So in Matthew, which came after Mark, they just wrote in, well, people say this thing, but it's actually the soldiers being bribed to say this thing, which is not true. It's like apologetics in the the fucking first century. It's like they make this stuff up. Like even if the soldiers were what the hell is going on here?
It's almost like Craig is seeing his spiritual ancestor.
Yeah, like it's sort of really unlikely that a Roman soldier would take a bribe to propagate the Christian religion. Like it's really unlikely.
Yeah, and it's such a wild fucking tale. Yeah, we let the disciples steal it so that they could spread miracle. Okay.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Now think about that for a moment. The disciples stole away his body. The earliest Jewish response to the proclamation of the resurrection was itself an attempt to explain why the body was missing.
No. That was not the Jewish response. Like, seriously, I that is what the book says. That is the claim that it makes. Right? Did somebody bring up, hey, you guys stole the body, and the guards say, hey, someone stole the body, and then you want to say, hey, it seems really weird. It's a very, very strange timeline.
It is. It's, oh my goodness. Like, if it was the actual Jewish response, maybe, there would be a record of it somewhere.
Uh-huh.
Or
it would be in Mark.
It's
which is the earlier one, but we kind of know that Matthew is the let's fix the plot holes in Mark.
Mm-hmm. It's so weird.
It's a weird one.
Testimony of the very adversaries of the early Christian movement supports the historicity of the empty tomb. I could go on, but I think that enough has been said.
Because that isn't the testament of the guards. That isn't the testament of the guards. That's the testament of the Jesus believers saying that the guards said this and were bribed. And the weirdest thing is, and I really have to point this out, right? The guards weren't bribed by the Jesus followers or whatever, right? They were bribed by the Sanhedrin in order to stop Jesus's credibility. So how the hell did the author of Matthew be present at a secret meeting to bribe the guards between the Sanhedrin and these guards?
And it doesn't even make sense if you think about it for a second. Remember, the Sanhedrin ostensibly wanted Jesus executed because of claiming to be God.
Yes.
And the resurrection, according to the Christians, is the proof that he is God. So why would the Sanhedrin, after having a demonstration that the guy they said is not God, is in fact God? These are people who believe in God. That's their entire thing. God is in their midst. Why the fuck would they mess with this dude? Why would they try to fuck him over if they know it's true? It doesn't make any fucking sense. If they did actually believe this, they wouldn't be bribing guards to spread rumors to discredit the reality of the risen fucking God. They would be throwing themselves at his feet saying, please forgive us because we're stupid.
Mhm.
How many camels would you like us to sacrifice? You know?
And they want to talk a lot about all these people at the time who believed it. But what about the people that didn't believe it? You know, all of the other Jews that just went, no, that isn't the Messiah. He didn't do any miracles and stuff. It's really hard to find witnesses to things that didn't happen, right? Like it's very, very hard to do so. So all of this thing of, oh, well, all of these people believed it. Yeah, but there were a ton of people that didn't. And you're expecting us to come out with witnesses of people that didn't do it, that didn't see anything. People don't come forward to tell you what they don't see.
But you know what people didn't see, since we're in the book of Matthew, my very favorite thing about the resurrection story, the zombie invasion of Jerusalem.
So while the women were on their way, some of the guards went to the city and reported to the chief priests everything that had happened. When the chief priests had met with the elders and devised a plan, they gave the soldiers a large sum of money, telling them, "You are to say his disciples came during the night and stole him away while we were asleep. If this report gets to the governor, we will satisfy him and keep you out of trouble." Yeah, because even they knew that if the guards started saying that, they would absolutely get into trouble. So they're saying, oh, the Sanhedrin would protect them against the governor. How? I don't understand that. So the soldiers took the money and did as they were instructed. And this story has been widely circulated among the Jews to this very day. What? How did they know? Did the Sanhedrin tell them, oh, yeah, and we bribed the guards to say all of this stuff?
Yeah, I also love that bit at the end, till this very day. But do go on about how this is an early account where there was no time for legend making and whatnot. Right. Unless I'm very mistaken, Ed, the book of Matthew is where the zombie invasion happens. It's during Resurrection weekend. All the graves in Jerusalem open up and all the dead people rise up and go into town and just, you know, meet and greet their friends and relatives, and nobody notices somehow in the capital of a Roman province.
To me, this sounds like people who were perhaps Jewish that did not believe this was the Messiah said, you know, when they were told about this empty tomb story in Mark, they said, well, it could have just been taken by the disciples. And so somebody felt the need to write an explanation of why that cannot be true. Does that mean that there was an empty tomb with a body or not? No, it just means that somebody heard an apologetic for at the time and some other person wrote an explanation. But this explanation is so full, it raises more questions. How did the Jewish people learn about it? What did the governor think about the guards basically doing this? How did the chief priest stop the governor from punishing his guards as he clearly seemed to wish he had the power to do? I don't understand any of this.
It's
It's weird. It's just a weird thing to put in a book.
I know, and they're also claiming that the Jews believe this till this very day.
Yeah.
Did anybody ask the Jews? Like, if you go to Jerusalem, you know, in the year 200 or whatever the fuck this is, and be like, hey, what do you know about this Jesus fella? They're just speculating, but they'd probably go, who?
Well, and the whole thing is, well, it doesn't say it was believed, and it's like this story has been widely circulated among Jews to this day. That doesn't mean that they believe it. And it's kind of like, it reminds me of those things where people put in their autobiographies kind of thing. And everybody around knew he was the best golfer that had ever trod these, you know, sort of links. I'm looking at you, Trump. Yes, I'm looking at you. You know, everybody knows that I'm the best negotiator out there. You know, it's kind of, yeah, you can say that, but that doesn't make it true. We don't know if it was widely circulated or just written down by someone as an apologetic.
Yeah, and I don't know if Craig has ever addressed the zombie apocalypse. He may have, and I just didn't see it, but I don't recall a time where he did specifically talk about it.
I can't either. I can't either. But if you want to bust apart Matthew, that is the thing to do it. It was earthquakes as well, which, you know, we've got people writing about earthquakes and there was no earthquake written about. That doesn't mean to say it couldn't have happened, but the people walking through the streets who were dead, you know, no other gospel writer felt that was significant enough to actually write about it, which is weird.
Yeah, there's a lot of weirdness. You know, one has hours of darkness, solar eclipse that lasts unnaturally long, just like the sun standing. They all have their own quirks that the others don't mention, which is weird. There's a lot weird.
In the words of Jakob Kramer, an Austrian specialist in this field, by far most exegetes hold firmly to the reliability of the biblical statements concerning the empty tomb. Now, Richard's main objection to the empty tomb is that Paul didn't believe in the empty tomb.
Paul didn't believe it. The fuck did Paul believe in then? I mean, maybe it's true. I just somehow wasn't aware of that.
I'd never heard that before.
I don't know that Paul ever actually says. Interesting.
Maybe he's aware of some scholarship that we're unaware of.
That's quite likely, I imagine, since this is literally both of their full-time jobs, and you know we have other shit to do.
Well, it says just a quick search says, and don't forget, I'm not a biblical scholar, but Paul says that Jesus was buried and raised on the third day ahead to in Corinthians. He says he was raised, but some scholars have suggested that the story of the empty tomb was invented by Mark because it is not referenced in the Pauline epistles.
Oh,
so
it's not that Paul disbelieved; it's that Paul hadn't ever heard that legend, so he just went with tomb Jesus was buried and then raised, like in a normal burial, like everyone else. Which tracks.
Which is a bit weird that Paul would be like this really staunch advocate for Christianity, have this amazing, incredible evidence of an empty tomb and not mention it in any way, shape, or form. Very, very strange. Yeah, it's kind of a bit weird.
Yeah, it's also a little strange the way Craig phrased it, but you know, apologists.
Yeah. Resurrection body is a spiritual body, wholly distinct from the corpse in the tomb. Now, if this is supposed to be
if he did have a spiritual body, then why would there need to be an empty tomb? Why would the tomb be a problem? Like, he's done with that body. He has a spiritual body now. It's very weird.
That's really weird, because then it wouldn't be an empty tomb. It would be a tomb with a body and a spirit in it.
Yeah, in fact, Craig's gotten into trouble on this one before. Well, it's actually later from his perspective, but earlier from our perspective, because time travel is weird that way. And yes, we are totally time traveling now. It's a valid thing.
Everyone's time traveling at one second per second. Yeah,
that's true. Yeah.
Well, time travel, I've had this argument before, what categorizes time travel. And I think time travel is categorized as moving from one point in time to another point in time without experiencing the intervening time.
I mean, yeah, you can definitely put it that way. To me, I often say, you know, time travel isn't that big a deal. We're all doing it right now, traveling into the future at 1 second per second. When we talk about time travel, we're just talking about altering that rate. We're not doing anything remarkable.
No,
we're just altering the rate.
I would argue that's time dilation, not time travel.
I mean, it's still time. You're not skipping ahead. It's like saying if I drive from New York to LA, that's not cross-continental travel because I went through all the points in between. It is cross-continental travel. I end up on the other side of the continent. I just don't have a portal gun for a shortcut, you know?
Yeah, but it's not teleportation.
Yeah. So we're not talking about time travel. We're talking about time teleportation.
Well, I think time travel would be categorized as not as teleportation through time.
But then it isn't time travel; it's time teleportation. I'm just being silly.
Okay.
Anyway,
No, it's
Craig
just,
got into trouble. So he said something like, "We know Jesus was the Messiah because Jesus died and rose." And the Jews had no expectation of a dying and rising savior because they didn't have this concept of the spirit being separate. Like when their version of resurrection is you bring your body with you.
Bodily resurrection.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
So this whole spiritual body thing that runs counter to the idea of Jesus being the Jewish Messiah in that time and whatnot. It's applying modern concepts onto the thing where spiritual is separate. It's like, no, the spirit was just the animating force in the physical body. The spirit can't do anything without the physical body. Because it's just the life force, you know?
Mm-hmm.
Ay.
Well, he's painted himself into a corner with sort of saying, well, if there was the body was not there, you've got to explain how it vanished. Well, now you've got to explain how it vanished.
Mm-hmm.
If it's just the spirit, then you've got to explain how it vanished. Did it disintegrate when the spirit came out? Did that get beamed up to heaven and his spirit stayed? Like, what's going on here?
It got burned into the shroud.
It got burned into the shroud. Oh, dear.
I tried to hold it in, but I couldn't resist.
I can't believe people still believe that freaking nonsense. Like, seriously. Not even the Vatican will say that's a real... Like, they know. They know it's not... If that was a real evidence of Jesus, they would absolutely be telling everybody. You know, like, they would absolutely... You know, they have it under lock and key. They won't confirm it and they won't deny it. For good reason.
Mm-hmm.
An argument against the empty tomb, then there's a massive assumption lying just beneath the surface, namely that we have no early independent evidence for the empty tomb. But we've just seen 5 lines of such evidence. So even if Paul believed on theological grounds that a resurrection doesn't require an empty tomb, that does nothing to deny the historical fact that Jesus' tomb was found empty. In any case,
still not a historical fact, but details.
Not a historical fact. And the point is that Paul, who was going around trying to get information about this miraculous occurrences and things and communicate that to all Christians, somehow missed this story of an empty tomb, is kind of a bit hard to believe.
Yeah, no, I mean, it's the most important thing. It's so important the Sanhedrin had to pay guards to lie about it and shit.
Right.
But fucking Paul, never heard of it. Okay.
Never heard of it. Yeah.
The key issue here is not whether our resurrection bodies will be radically different from our present earthly bodies. Rather, the key question is, how does the resurrection body come to be? Is it by transformation of the earthly body, or by exchanging the earthly body for another body?
Ooh, do we get to do trade-ins? Can I get an electric?
This is like a ship of thesis thing. But I see what I mean. He's gone to philosophy kind of thing. Mm-hmm. Like, it's not whether or not we will have, you know, bodies afterwards. It's how it's changed. It's just like, you might as well be arguing about, you know, how a move is done in Dragon Ball Z. Like, seriously, dude. Like, you haven't established any of this happens. It's so weird. It's almost like a diversion tactic. Like, let's stop arguing of whether the body is real and start talking about how the body will change when it's resurrected.
I think this may be, he knows he's near the end of his time. He may be throwing out a red herring to try to distract.
Yep.
Let me mention briefly that Paul believed in a transformation of the earthly body to the resurrection body. First, in 1 Corinthians 15, Paul is clearly speaking of intrinsic change, not exchange. The Greek verb alasso has the same range of meanings as our English word change. Sometimes it means intrinsic change in a single subject. For example, we say to an old friend, "My, how you've changed." Sometimes it can mean exchange. That's when we say, "I changed money at the airport." Now, as Richard himself says, when interpreting words and phrases, context is everything. When alasso is used as exchange, the verb typically takes a direct object or prepositional phrase. For example, in Romans 1:23, Paul says they exchanged the glory of God for images. Now, in 1 Corinthians 15, Paul never says we shall change bodies. Rather, he says, the trumpet will sound and we shall be changed. The passage only makes sense as intrinsic change.
In English.
Yeah, I think I get what he's saying, though. He's sort of saying, hey, we won't change the body for another one. Rather, the body will be changed into something else, basically. It will transform rather than a substitute will come. But I don't get how this gets to whether, it doesn't link to the empty tomb. It doesn't link to anything factual. It's just Paul saying something. Like, who cares?
Yeah,
I don't.
It's the pedantry tactic that we've caught Craig doing several times before. In that debate with Hitchens, he would get off on, well, in Greek this word can mean this and that, and so this word could mean this, but it could also mean this, but this one is actually in Aramaic and was translated into Greek, which means that it could do this and this and this. All of which is to say, do you know what the meaning of the word is? It's like, you could have said that in 2 sentences.
And the reason why this is irrelevant is because no matter what Paul believed and wrote down, he wasn't there. He's got he wasn't around at the time these events occurred. He's not a witness. He's not anybody. He's just writing down crap. We can't take Paul's word for what happened because he came along later wanting to promote the Christian church and taking down a whole bunch of stories. That doesn't make him credible. It doesn't mean that he knows what happened because he wasn't there.
Yeah, he was there as much as you or I or Dr. Craig or Dr. Carrier.
That reminds me. Jin Wow says, yes, the Clinton defense. Is this the Chewbacca defense? Is this what this is?
The
You've never heard of the... Yeah.
Oh, it's a South Park thing, isn't it?
The Chewbacca defense. It's the O.J. Simpson thing.
Yeah, Johnny Cochran in the South Park episode. It's something like, so in Star Wars, there's this character named Chewbacca, and he's from a planet, but we never get to see the planet, and it doesn't make sense. And he hangs out with
it's actually
who understands him.
in the movies, he lives on Endor with the Ewoks, and it doesn't make sense, kind of thing. It's this whole thing, and it's just. And if it doesn't make sense, you've got to acquit my client, kind of thing. And lawyers actually use that term, the Chewbacca defense, as when a lawyer does a argument that has absolutely no relevance. Because the defense that Cochran actually used was like, look at my client, he's got all this money, his life has gone well. It does not make sense he would want to do this kind of thing. It makes no sense. And it was weird because that has nothing to do with whether a person's a criminal or not. That
Oh yeah, in fact, we know from statistics that it's no absolute guarantee because statistics don't apply to individuals.
Yeah.
But there's a certain bell curve of law abidingness, right? Mm-hmm. People in the middle tend to be a lot more law abiding because they're not desperate enough to have to break the law to survive necessarily, but they're also not wealthy enough to pay the lawyers to get away with breaking the law. Yeah. So people in the middle are more law abiding. But once you pass that middle point, the more money you get, the more likely you are to break the law.
Yeah. and sort of the problem with power as well that comes from wealth, like people who are wealthy, not everybody, and certainly not a huge, but there's a percentage of people who become wealthy and think that they can do anything.
Mm-hmm.
Again, I'm looking at you, Trump, and that one apparently is true. So
Mm-hmm.
who the fuck knows? So yeah, but this sounds like a Chewbacca defense. Like, Paul said that your body changes, so why would he say that? It makes no sense. The resurrection must be true.
Sure.
Second, Paul's verbs of sowing and raising have the same implicit subject. It is sown, it is raised. 4 times Paul repeats this. To escape the implication of numerical identity, Richard is forced to mistranslate the passage so that the verbs take different subjects. One is sown, one, that is another one, is raised. Thirdly, Paul's use of the pronoun this points to our mortal bodies or nature that must be changed. 4 times he says, this perishable must put on imperishability. This mortal must put on immortality, indicating the transformation that must take place in our mortal bodies. And fourth, Paul elsewhere speaks of the change that our mortal bodies will undergo in the resurrection. Philippians 3:21, he will change our lowly body to be similar to his glorious body. Romans 8:10 and 11, he who raised Christ from the dead will make alive your mortal bodies also. Romans 8:23, we await adoption, the redemption of our bodies. For these and other reasons, the vast majority of contemporary commentators agree that in the resurrection, Paul envisages a transformation of the earthly body. Accordingly, we can say, no corpse left behind. Fact number 3, on different occasions...
Hold it.
My God, Bill.
Bill, the problem isn't that Paul was saying there was a body left behind. That's not the problem here. The problem is that Paul only says he was buried and resurrected and makes no mention whatsoever of this empty tomb. That only comes later in Mark. So that suggests that that is a story, because that is the one piece of evidence that even today apologists keep falling on. For Paul to so thoroughly investigate Christianity and basically want to promote it so much and miss that story seems really, like, especially since, as the Bible says, these stories were widely circulated among the Jewish people. It literally says that.
And on
but
top
Paul
of that,
doesn't know it.
Paul made an active investigation. He made it a point to go to Jerusalem and talk to the remaining apostles.
Yes.
And none of them told him this kind of important tidbit. Almost like it was made up later.
Right. Or it wasn't significant enough to write down or write a letter to anybody saying, hey, there was an empty tomb and everybody knew that it was covered by a boulder and suddenly the body wasn't there. Paul just missed that, or he just didn't think it's significant enough to write down. That's the problem you have to address. You're addressing a totally different problem, which is Paul thinks that the body wasn't resurrected, only the spirit, and that's not the issue here. It's almost like he wants to point out something that isn't a problem to detract from the actual problem we have with Paul's story.
Yeah, I mean, I'm having a really hard time, like, even caring what Paul has to say, because again, not a witness.
Not a witness, wasn't there. He just collected stories afterwards. That's it.
Ay.
Yeah.
Well, I was hoping Craig would be done, like, by now, since the openings are 20 minutes, but apparently he's got a third thing for us. Let's.
Oh, great!
I wonder if he's just going to go until the moderator cuts him off. We'll see. Place your bets.
Maybe.
Circumstances, different individuals and groups of people experienced appearances of Jesus alive from the dead. This is a fact which is virtually universally acknowledged among New Testament scholars and by Richard as well, for the following reasons. 1. Paul's list of eyewitnesses to Jesus' resurrection appearances guarantees that such appearances occurred. Paul tells
it does not. Paul's list is, I have a list of 500 names.
Yes.
Like, 500 people couldn't be lying. Really? Let me tell you about January 6th, my friend. But more than
Yeah.
that, we don't know there were 500. It's Paul saying there were 500.
And I mean, that was literally captured on camera. And there are still people that say there was no violence by the protesters or the insurrectionists on January the 6th. And people say no guns were fired. We've got video footage of someone firing a gun into the air.
Yeah.
And they still believe it.
Mm-hmm. It's a horrible, horrible thing that still terrifies and infuriates me both, but it's really useful for the demonstration of how humans are susceptible to myth making. I mean, the fact that it happens not just in the present, but when there's mountains of evidence about what really happened, including video and people who really were there, and they still just as the apologists often say, it's not a matter of the head, it's a matter of the heart. No amount of evidence is going to convince people when they're determined to believe something.
Yep.
Tells us that Jesus appeared to his chief disciple, Peter, then to the inner circle of disciples known as the 12. Then he appeared to a group of 500 disciples at once. Then to his younger brother, James, who up to that time was apparently not a believer, then to all the apostles. Finally, Paul adds, he appeared also to me at the time when Paul was still a non-believing.
Wait, if he...
objection, spectral evidence.
Right? Like he appeared physically before the disciples and, Thomas pokes his holes and shit. But then when he appeared to Paul, he could only do it as a hallucination? Did he run out of juice?
Well, and the funny thing is that, okay, he appeared physically to all of these people, but they didn't recognize him.
Yeah, it
totally looked like somebody else.
It's the magic user spell from D&D first edition, the reincarnation. You just, you got a different, maybe you're an elf now, maybe you're a dwarf, who knows? It's wild. But what I was gonna pick up on is the way Craig rattles off the different things. Like first he appears to this group, then he appears to the disciples, then he appears to all 500 people, and then he appears to all the apostles. How many fucking people are we talking about here? Like if he already appeared to everyone who believes in him, then who else is there?
Yeah. But I just think that you sort of saying, okay, he appeared to Jesus appeared to all of these people. It's sort of, how do you know it was Jesus? Like, they didn't recognize him. He looked like somebody else. That's usually how like, if you're in a court of law and you said, oh, yes, I see that person that stole my bag, but it doesn't look like the person anymore that I saw steal my bag. We would say, no, then that's not the person. Right?
Especially if you keep your body. Like, for fuck's sake, why would he look different if he's in the same body? It just it makes me think of the same apologetics arguments we see today. There is a creation, therefore there must have been a creator, therefore it was Jesus, right? It's like you get this argument from incredulity, and at the very end of it, you just hop over to therefore whatever the fuck I happen to believe in. So Paul sees a light, and he goes, "Oh, well, that's a divine supernatural thing,
right?
Therefore, it must have been Jesus."
And sort of Anarchic Fox makes a very good point. Like, they didn't recognize him. Makes me think about a shoddy body double to keep a grift running, right? So you think of the Gospel of Thomas, where he poked at his holes and said, oh, this person's been crucified, it must be my Lord. People survived crucifixions. In fact, Joseph, who was it? Somebody recorded somebody surviving, Josephus. Yeah, it was Josephus that recorded somebody surviving a crucifixion. So is it impossible that that was another person that survived crucifixion? No, it's not impossible, because people survived it. People were rescued by friends and family. In that particular one that Josephus recorded, the governor went, oh, I've made a mistake, I will pardon him, I will let him go. And that the guards took him down, and he survived. So we know people survived crucifixion.
Yeah, that's a really good point. It may well be that the discrepancy in appearance was because that was the only person who had the requisite marks that they could hire, and they could point at it and be like, look, behold, he resurrected. You know?
Yep.
Yeah, he looks different, but I mean, when you die and come back, maybe that happens. Just believe,
yeah,
you know?
Like, that's one explanation, that it was somebody who had survived crucifixion that they shoved in front saying, hey, it's Jesus. He doesn't look the same because he's been changed. Or God resurrected him in such a way that it preserved all of the marks and scars and stuff on his body from the horrendous experience, yet healed him. So obviously, you know, he wasn't dripping blood on the floor, or, you know, was restarted his heart, so he wasn't, but changed him so he looked like this is ridiculous. He looked like somebody else so that nobody would recognize him. Why?
Yeah, like, wouldn't that be, if this wasn't a shady-ass cover-up, why wouldn't they be proclaiming that as one of the miracles? Like, God even changed his features so that the guards wouldn't try to chase him down again, you know? Like that. But if that were a legit thing, they should be saying, look how cool this is. Not, oh, and also, but don't pay any attention to that, you know?
But why wouldn't his disciples recognize him? Even if you wanted to cover him up for the guards, you're sort of saying, well, God can, you know, has to appear one way for either everybody or nobody at all, right? But you're a God that wants people to believe in your miracles for their redemption, and you change what he looks like for some reason. Why would you do that? Why not keep him exactly the same? And if you want to say, well, God didn't have that power, that transformation just changed him, why? It's God.
It's special pleading all the way down. Or,
oh, absolutely,
as Nitty points out, it's a tradition in the Greek epics to conceal the hero and build tension.
That's a good point. Yeah, good point, Nitty. Yeah.
Leaving persecutor of the early Jesus movement. Given the early date of Paul's information, as well as his personal acquaintance with the people involved, such appearances cannot be dismissed as unhistorical. And second, the appearance narratives in the Gospels provide multiple independent attestation of the appearances. The appearance narrative spans such a breadth of independent sources that it cannot be reasonably denied that the earliest disciples did have such experiences.
What sources, Bill? What are the independent sources? Why don't we have affidavits from each of the 500 witnesses independently?
Why don't we even have their names?
Right. But like, Paul could. He could write down their accounts and have them make their mark to sign. I mean, Paul even makes a freaking big deal about signatures, right? There's that forgery crisis in his letters, so that he notes in one of the canonical letters, there are forgeries running around. You'll know my authentic works by my signature. So he knows about this. He could have written the accounts for them and had each of them make their mark to preserve the record. He could have done it, and he didn't. So, what up?
or alternatively, he could have just thrown out, hey, there's 500 people that saw this. He could have just made it up.
He could have. It's pretty plausible. No, I'm not saying, I'm not making a positive claim that he did, but we have no reason to believe otherwise. Nitty points out, Odysseus hid his identity by disguising himself as a beggar when he returned to Ithaca, allowing him to secretly observe the situation in his palace and assess the loyalty of his wife Penelope and others before revealing himself to them. This disguise is a key element of his cunning plan to reclaim his rightful place. Jesus comes back, observes the situation, tells the story of how to reclaim his rightful place with the Father. And it does bear repeating that the New Testament written in Greek. So, I mean, studying the Epic of Homer, both of them, is how scholars learned not just how to write, but how to write stories, how to create narratives. That was the thing they learned on. So they would definitely be aware of it.
Homer was kind of the Shakespeare of his age kind of thing.
And yeah, like Shakespeare, his works persisted as the preeminent things for centuries.
New Testament critic Gerhard Ludemann concludes, it may be taken as historically certain that Peter and the disciples had experiences after Jesus' death in which Jesus appeared to them as the risen Christ. Finally, fact number 4, the original disciples suddenly and sincerely came to believe that Jesus was risen from the dead, despite their having every predisposition to the contrary. Think of the situation the disciples faced following Jesus' crucifixion.
That's a really weirdly phrased statement, because if you're primed to think a certain way about your sort of cult leader, okay, if you're believe that he's going to do certain things before he passes away, and you're primed for that, like, why would you have a predisposition to think, to against this story? I don't think so. I think that if you are that in on the cult leader and they die, you would be predisposed to thinking this can't be true, that he's really gone. Like, denial is one of the steps of grief. So I don't think every predisposition is actually true. I think there's a lot of people whose cult leaders have died and they've gone, no, he's not really dead. He's just secretly hanging out somewhere.
Yeah, we still see that kind of thing happening today. Like, it's less common, but I can't think of a specific example off the top of my head. But I know at least Bree has covered a couple of people like that.
Yes. Yeah. I mean, there's the Elvis people. They still believe Elvis is alive, or back with aliens or whatever. But
there's so much evidence by apologetic standards. There is more evidence that Elvis is resurrected than Jesus. It's fucking wild. Thank you, folks, for the ad notices. So
that's 2 hours, so it's on every hour, once an hour, it looks like.
That's probably not too bad. I don't know. I as I've said before, I don't see the ads because I've got premium on my account, because I go through so many fucking videos to find things to work with.
Yeah, same here.
I can't remember how it normally is. Like, if I'm getting more ads than one would expect, or less, or I don't know. If there were no ads, would that be better or worse? I'm not really sure. But I do appreciate you guys letting me know so that we can do the data analysis.
Their leader was dead, and Jewish messianic expectations had no idea of a Messiah who, instead of triumphing over Israel's enemies, would be humiliatingly executed by them as a criminal. 2, Jewish beliefs about the afterlife precluded anyone's rising from the dead to glory and immortality before the general resurrection of the dead at the end of the world.
Except no. I mean, yes, Orthodox Jewish beliefs, as I understand it, ran along those lines. But the resurrection stuff was already in the mythology. Jesus wasn't even the first person running around doing resurrections of other people. But within Jesus's own storyline, there's at least Lazarus, and depending on which version, there's as many as 4 different people that Jesus raised. So there's already resurrections. And in those cases, every one of them kept their body.
Yep. And especially the saints you mentioned earlier, the hundreds of saints that rose from their graves and wandered around Jerusalem.
Yeah. If that's demonstrating, that's setting the expectation for how resurrection is to work, then it's Chekhov's zombie. We put the zombie in the grave early, so that when the zombie shambles out of the grave, you know what you're looking at.
Yeah.
Nevertheless, the original disciples suddenly came to believe so strongly that God had raised Jesus from the dead that they were willing to die for the truth of that belief.
Oh, I hate this one.
Yeah, were they? How did they die?
They were not.
Yeah.
So again, this is from 2009. This was before the skeptical scholars forced the theological scholars to do better. But Paulogia does a great breakdown on this one.
Yeah.
TLDR, we know 2 of them died. 2.
Yes.
And neither of them got a choice in the matter. So
right. Yeah. So and we don't know it was necessarily linked to religion. I mean, often they'll point to, Peter being crucified upside down. We don't know that actually happened. That appears in a later work the Christians don't acknowledge. It's not a canonic account. We don't know that for sure.
Yeah, there's a lot of things being assumed, but also it would be incomplete if I didn't bring up the point. People dying because they believe something does not make it true.
Right.
Lots of, I mean, we've got Buddhist monks setting themselves on fire to protest the military dictatorship in Myanmar. We've got people of all kinds of faiths strapping bombs to themselves for the glory of whatever the fuck they believe in. If this case had any merit, then all the gods are real, Yeah.
So that must mean that Buddhism and reincarnation must be true, as well as Islam and, the heaven with, virgins in it for the 72 virgins, I believe it is, for people that die. It doesn't make sense. You can't consistently believe that everyone that will die for a cause, the cause is automatically true.
But then the obvious question arises. What caused them to believe such an un-Jewish and outlandish thing? Luke Johnson, a New Testament scholar at Emory University, muses, some sort of powerful, transformative experience is required to generate the sort of movement earliest Christianity was.
Really? Because we have even more outrageous movements running around today.
Yep.
What powerful experience could convince otherwise Orthodox Christians to believe L. Ron fucking Hubbard or Joseph Smith?
Joseph Smith, yeah. Or Islam. Islam, they fervently believe it. It doesn't matter. It may be significant to them, but does that mean we have to take that as evidence that their belief is true? No, we never do that. Like, what other situation does somebody have some sort of experience and we go, oh, it seems like you really believe that. I'm going to consider it true then.
Yeah. Oh, beheaded kamikaze. Says Jesus couldn't exist in modern times. We'd cremate the body and then how would he rise? Except first we'd want to do an autopsy. And if the coroner is away for the weekend, you die on a Friday, the coroner's away for the weekend, you're going to be chilling in that freezer for 3 days. So can you imagine being Jesus and you get to the 3rd day and you're in the middle of your autopsy and then suddenly,
I don't know.
Oh.
If you can walk on water, I gotta believe that you're like at least a little fireproof, right? Like, come on now.
I mean, he did go to hell, according to the legend.
I mean, look, if we're making crap up, let's just say that Jesus isn't affected by fire. Like, seriously, let's just make stuff up. Jesus is fire retardant. Oh dear, I think I got your channel demonetized there. I'm so sorry.
Oh, how dare you?
Yeah. At least there'd be a witness. Yeah, true. Beheaded. Absolutely true.
Yeah.
At least the mortician would be a witness. Yeah.
N.T. Wright, an eminent New Testament historian, concludes, that is why, as an historian, I cannot explain the rise of early Christianity unless Jesus rose again, leaving an empty tomb behind him. In summary, then,
yes, but that's like saying you cannot explain the rise of Islam unless all the miracles that Muhammad did are true. It's affirming the consequent, right? It's saying if we are like if the stories are true, then there'd be a lot of people that believe the stories are true. People believe the stories are true, therefore they are true. It doesn't follow. And to hear a philosopher sort of doing this is really bad because there are other reasons why. You can do the same for, like Ember said, you can do the same for Scientology. You can do the same for, if Joseph Smith didn't do all of these miraculous things, sorry, if Joseph Smith did all of these miraculous things, we would expect people to absolutely believe they're true. People absolutely believe it's true. Therefore, he did all of these miraculous things. It is a logical fallacy for a reason. There might be other reasons why they believe so fervently. They had a experience that they thought was mystical but wasn't. They are part of a community. They were indoctrinated. They were deluded. They were convinced by people around them. It's sort of an emperor's new clothes situation where everybody's afraid to actually say, hey, no, I don't believe it. And so they end up believing. Like, all of this stuff happens a lot. It's ridiculous.
Yeah. And
this is a ridiculous argument.
It is. And frankly, it's what's the term for embarrassment by proxy? Is it also covered under cringe? It might be cringe, but
secondhand cringe.
Yeah. To have Craig dishonor his diploma as a PhD level philosopher by throwing out these 101 level fallacies like an absolute fucking noob is just, it makes me want to like shrivel up inside, you know?
No.
Agreed upon by the majority of scholars who have written on the subject. Jesus' burial, his empty tomb, his post-mortem appearances, and the origin of the disciples' belief in his resurrection. That brings us then to the second major contention, that the best explanation of these facts is that God raised Jesus from the dead.
That is a hell of a reach.
Yeah.
I mean,
so notice he didn't put the historians believe the best explanation. Like, he really stretching when he's saying historians believe that all these things were fact. I don't know about that one, champ. I don't think that most historians think that there was definitely an empty tomb and it was, you know, those people found definitely what they say they found. I would push back against that one.
Mm-hmm. But, you know, let's see what he has to say.
In his book, Justifying Historical Descriptions, historian C.B. McCullough lists 6 tests which historians use in determining what is the best explanation for given historical facts. The hypothesis, God raised Jesus from the dead, passes all of these tests. 1.
This should be good.
Yeah, this should be awesome. Yeah.
It has great explanatory scope. It explains all 4 of the facts before us. 2, it has great explanatory power. It explains each fact well. 3, it is plausible. Given the historical context of...
Well, that's where you run into the problem. That's where it stumbles. Like, there's a lot of explanations that could explain these things.
I want to disagree with number 2. It does have great explanatory scope, because anytime you're appealing to omnipotence, to something that can literally do anything, it can explain anything. So the difference between explanatory scope and explanatory power is that explanatory scope like accounts for a vast amount of details, which God does. Like, if you want to say, you know, why is there such evil on the thing, on the world? Well, God wants it that way. God works in mysterious ways. It can account for anything. That's not a point in its favor, by the way. Explanatory power is how well it describes what happened, right? How much detail it provides, and sort of how much it explains the process of what happened. Like, if you want to give an explanation of how milk ended up in your fridge, or, you know, how you got your food, you could say, hey, I bought it from the store, right? Or you could say, hey, I traveled down this street, went to the store, went inside the store, went to this aisle, got this thing, came back out. That's explanatory power. It's saying how much detail you've got, how much explanation it's actually got, how much it actually describes the process. And I would say a God, like magic and miracles, describe nothing of that. So how did this actually happen? Right? You're saying, well, God resurrected it. Okay, how did that happen? How does that work? Oh, God works in mysterious ways. That's the point. There is no explanatory power. There's none whatsoever. You're just saying God done it. That's it.
It's a miracle.
Right. Miracles and magic they don't have explanatory power. They are simply, well, we don't know how it's done, but it's done. That isn't that isn't something with explanatory power ever. Like, it never is. So I really want to push back against point 2 that it has explanatory power, because any of the holes in these stories are plugged by, well, God just changed his body so no one would recognize him. You know, like any loose thread is just covered up by that. But why? How? How did this happen? Miracle. Plausibility? I'm really sorry, but it is not plausible that someone comes back from the dead until you show it's plausible. Like, I'm really sorry, but you can't just beg the question and go, well, it's plausible that God did a miracle. Yeah, can we get demonstrations that that's actually even possible, much less plausible? Because at the moment, we don't have evidence that is possible. You're just saying it happened.
I can propose maybe life on Mars. It's plausible, and people would quibble with me over that. I mean, it's not logically impossible, and it's definitely not probable. So it's somewhere in the middle. It might be plausible, but we'd have to have the discussion because it's just not an automatic gimme, you know?
Jesus' own unparalleled life and claims, the resurrection serves as divine confirmation of those claims. 4.
Yeah, that's what makes it circular, Bill. That's the problem right there.
Yep.
It is not ad hoc or contrived.
It isn't. It isn't. We were just talking about how Matthew is written in such a way as to plug plot holes in Mark, but it's not ad hoc. It's not contrived. Well, do tell, Dr. Craig.
Yeah.
Requires only one additional hypothesis, that God exists, which I take to be established by the arguments of natural theology. 5, it is in accord with accepted
arguments
beliefs.
of natural theology. So the arguments of religious claims you take to be true, therefore you grant that hypothesis. That is not a hypothesis that would stand up in any kind of, scientific evaluation or any kind of other evaluation. Like, why should we grant that hypothesis? You've skipped over that. This is begging the question. This is saying that something is true without you actually demonstrating it. And I said at the start of this review, he's going to have a problem with this because he's automatically going to grant God. And that's a problem because he has not demonstrated in any way. He's just said, no, I grant it. Therefore, it's true.
Yeah. Where's the thing? Okay, I'm going to go back a little bit so we can get that whole sentence. Hopefully I can. Nope, I did not go back a little bit. This will do, though.
Or contrived. It requires only one additional hypothesis, that God exists, which I take to be established by the arguments of natural theology. 5, it is in accord with accepted beliefs. The hypothesis...
People believe it. Well, that makes it a historical fact. Yeah. People, did you know that there are people who believe that some dude in the 7th century got his hands on a fucking Pegasus and just flew up to heaven with it? I mean, people believe it. So it's a historical fact.
People believe. What kind of idiot would think that because you have a hypothesis, like just say in science, right? Because you have a hypothesis and people think it's true, then it's a true hypothesis. It should be theory and we teach it as science. Are you serious? Flat Earth is a hypothesis and people believe it. So it's true. Welcome to Flat Earth, William Lane Craig. Congratulations. Wow.
PhD in philosophy. My fucking God.
Yep. And this is why I think it's Seth Andrews that says, being a Christian made him talk like an idiot.
Mm-hmm.
And this is why we kind of go, because it's a hypothesis that people believed is one of his evidences. Wow. Just wow.
Raised Jesus from the dead in no way conflicts with the accepted belief that people don't rise naturally from the dead. I accept that belief as wholeheartedly as I accept the hypothesis that God raised Jesus from the dead. And finally,
Special
number 6,
pleading.
it far out.
That's a problem too, because he's saying these are on equal footing for him, which means that his rational basis for thinking that people don't naturally rise from the dead is not founded on reality. It's just a thing he chooses to believe because he wants to, not because he's convinced based on actual facts.
Well, it's induction, right? This is what we're talking about. When you're like, when you're getting evidence for something, generally it is inductive evidence, right? You're saying, hey, people die all the time and then they don't raise from the dead. Like, we've had trillions of examples of people dying and not being raised from the dead. But I'm going to make a special example of someone that did and sort of believe it and say, hey, but that's not the same thing. That's a supernatural raise from the dead, not a natural raise from the dead. Well, what are you basing that upon? Like, we've heard this evidence from these stories. They are exactly that. They're stories, anecdotal evidence. That's all they are. Like, it's very, very strange to say, hey, I believe people can't raise from the dead, except when it's supernatural. Then people can.
And that invites a lot of question begging, because then you're like, well, I mean, this other dude raised from the dead, therefore it must have been supernatural.
Yeah.
God did it. You can't prove he did
it.
Yeah.
Yeah. How did God do it? Who knows? Doesn't
Magic.
matter. But somehow it's got explanatory power. Then we should expect you to explain how it happens, but you can't.
Strips any rival theories in meeting conditions 1 to 5. No naturalistic hypothesis has attracted a great number of scholars. On the basis of what I...
No, that's not true. There is one that has attracted a rather great number of scholars. That the whole thing is fucking fiction.
Yeah.
There are people who just don't believe it.
And you don't have to take the mythicist position for that. You can think that, hey, Jesus was an itinerant rabbi and it's all bullcrap that was made up by people who had a vested interest in promoting the religion. Because they did. This whole thing of there is no predisposition to state other than what happened. They absolutely did. Even if they were fooling themselves, like deluding themselves, which does happen. I will point you to my Friday thing where I showed fake martial arts where their acolytes actually fall down from being touched by the dim mak death touch. They have deluded themselves into thinking it's real. The power of self-delusion is actually incredible. Somebody in the chat showing us right now the power of self-delusion, who says,
sure.
What did he say that made me like lose it? We don't lie, it's against our God, he says while lying. Which is hilarious.
I mean, double standards is adjacent to having standards or something.
Standards adjacent. I love it. Yeah.
Yes.
Okay. Wow. Morally adjacent.
Love it.
Yeah.
What I said, then I think that the best explanation of the facts is the one that the original eyewitnesses gave, that God raised Jesus from the dead. Today, the rational man can hardly be blamed if he concludes that on that first Easter morning, a divine miracle occurred.
So, look, for that statement to be true, look, I want to say this. For that statement to be true, it would have to be demonstrated that no Christian ever prayed for forgiveness for lying. Think about that for a second. Like, you really think a Christian hasn't lied and then asked for forgiveness for it? Like, are you serious? That is a good band name. You're right. I've got tons in head, Kamikaze.
Where's Brentley? we need Brentley, and we need Bree, and Jay Bundy plays drums, and yeah, we can do this. Morally adjacent. Fuck yeah. He's so young.
Yeah.
Also, I'm you know, I wanted to pause it to note the timestamp because Craig's 20-minute opening did run a little bit long.
Mhm.
All right, I'm going to cut to the chase. Dr. Craig has only two sources of historical evidence in reality: the epistles and the gospels. Point blank,
Yep.
my argument is the gospels have no relevant value as historical.
Look at his face. He
The
does a
epistles-
smirk as he realizes, yep, that's actually true. Yeah. All of these independent sources he claims, not actually independent. They are people having written down the stories and Paul running around gathering the stories and then writing letters about them. That's it. That's all.
Don't tell us anything we can prove was unnatural. First up, the Gospels record myth, not history. I wanted to debate that subject with Dr. Craig today, but he didn't want to, so now I can only give you some examples proving my point, so I can leave room to discuss the many other topics in this debate. But I can assure you, if I had more time, these examples could be multiplied a dozen times over. One of the clearest examples of myth-making in the Gospels is the Barabbas narrative. According to Mark, the Romans occupying Judea had a custom of releasing a prisoner every year on the Jewish holiday, whoever the Jews voted for. So Pilate asks the Jews if they want him to release Jesus Christ. And instead, the chief priests convince everyone to ask for Barabbas instead, a convicted murderer who had rebelled against Rome. Now, there is no evidence the Romans ever had such a custom of releasing just any prisoner the Jews wanted. Nor is it at all plausible. The Romans certainly would not let loose a murderer and a traitor, least of all because the very people who rebelled asked them to. But Mark's story clearly copies an actual ritual the Jews performed at their temple every year at Yom Kippur. 2 goats would be selected. One would be chosen to be the scapegoat, and all the sins of Israel would be placed upon it, and it would be released into the wild, to be claimed by the devil. While the other goat would be sacrificed, and its blood would atone for the sins of all Israel. Now, as it happens, Barabbas is a fake name. In Aramaic, it means son of the father. So here we have 2 sons of the father, Barabbas and Jesus. One who carries the sins of Israel, murder and rebellion, and is released to the mob, and the other whose blood atones for the sins of all Israel.
That is fascinating.
Yeah, I didn't know that.
Also, you know, you'd think the scapegoat who gets invested with all the sins, that would be the unfortunate one. But actually, it's the pure innocent goat who gets fucking murdered, which should be a lesson to all of us. Sin and be safe from the angry mob who wants innocent blood. Wow, drummers are quick. Yeah, Jay, we're doing a band. Where'd it go? Morally adjacent. There it is. Yes, we're going to be morally adjacent.
So here we have a historically unbelievable story involving a man with a fake name that nevertheless carries deep symbolic meaning. By definition, that's a myth. This story has been constructed by the author for its symbolism. It's not a historical report of anything that actually happened. Now, there are many more examples like this surveyed in the works of biblical scholars like Randall Helms and Thomas Brody and Burton Mack and Jonathan Reed and Helmut Koester and many more. As scholars have long known, all the Gospels are filled to the brim with stories deliberately constructed for their symbolic and literary meaning rather than their historical verity. For example, one indicator of myth is the inclusion of implausibly convenient story structure, what literary scholars call deliberate irony. Mark, for example, has Jesus constantly talking about the reversal of expectation as the message of the gospel, teaching with many parables that the least shall be first, the high will be brought low, the meek shall inherit the earth, the poor shall be rich, and so on. So it's a rather implausible coincidence when the actual narrative of Mark's story is filled with remarkably convenient reversals of expectation. James and John, who asked to sit at the right and left of Jesus in his glory, are replaced by 2 thieves on his right and left at his crucifixion.
Ooh, I really enjoy that because it's not where Craig is all bullshit. The Greek word means this. Here's a logical fallacy. Carrier's like not just bringing the actual factuals, but he's breaking down how the story structure works, why the myths are the way they are.
Yep.
So cool.
Mm-hmm.
Simon Peter, Christ's right-hand man, who is told he had to deny himself and take up his cross and follow, denies Christ instead and is replaced by a different Simon, Simon of Cyrene, a stranger who actually takes up his cross and follows. Likewise, contrary to expectation, Christ's own people, the Jews, mock their own Savior, while it is a Gentile officer of Rome who recognizes his divinity. And the male disciples abandon Jesus, while the women truly follow him and are thus the first to learn of his resurrection, proving again that the least shall be first, and on and on. Countless elements of Mark's story involve deliberately fabricated irony like this. Another indicator of myth is the construction of stories, even down to the specific details, using material from the Old Testament. It's well known, for example, that Mark constructs his crucifixion narrative using material from Psalm 22. The casting of lots for his clothes, Jesus' cry on the cross, the taunts of the crowd, all come from that psalm, often verbatim. But as I show in the empty tomb, Mark also constructed his empty tomb narrative using material from Genesis, Ecclesiastes, Chronicles, and Psalm 24 in a similar way.
And before he gets to that, I want to add the little bit that my layman brain can throw in and point out that we do know, what we common folk do know, that there are deliberate add-ins in attempts to fulfill prophecy, like one gospel having Jesus riding into Jerusalem on a donkey, seemingly only to fulfill a prophecy, where another one has him riding in on a horse, and I think another one has him riding in on two horses at the same time, or some crazy batshit like that. It's all just to make the prophecy work. So we know there's a lot of shit that's been, at the very least, added in, if not fabricated wholesale, because of what's in, or what they thought was in the Old Testament, like the born of a virgin thing. Turns out that's not actually what that meant, but too late, they already put it in the story.
Another indicator of myth is the inclusion of deliberate parallels and inversions of other myths. For example, Luke tells the story of a man named Cleopas who journeys on the road from Jerusalem to Emmaus after the corpse of Jesus has vanished, when the resurrected Jesus appears to him and explains the secrets of the kingdom. Then he vanishes, and Cleopas goes on to proclaim what he was told. As it happens, the name Cleopas conveniently means tell all. In other words, proclaim. Moreover, this tale exactly emulates and in deliberate ways inverts a story already celebrated every year in Rome, and in that other story, a man named Proculus, whose name also means proclaim, journeys on the road from Alba Longa to Rome after the corpse of Romulus has vanished. And just like Jesus, the resurrected Romulus appears and explains the secrets of empire. Then he vanishes, and Proculus goes on to proclaim what he was told. In both stories, the men are journeying from east to west, toward the sea, along the path of the sun, from a city on a mountain to a city in a valley, and in both stories, the distance of the road is exactly the same, 14 miles. These similarities are too numerous to be a coincidence. Again, this is deliberate symbolic fiction. And like many...
I appreciate the points he's making, but I do, in good conscience, have to quibble here. There are too many similarities for it to be a coincidence isn't the strongest argument. It's incredulity. If an apologist were saying it, I'd call him out for it, and I can't not now. You know?
Yeah.
Many myths, the way the story is changed is the whole point. The similarities tell us what story to compare it to, while the differences tell us what the author wants us to learn from that comparison. Romulus told Proculus that if the Romans are virtuous, they will conquer the world. But Jesus told Cleopas that the virtuous will join a spiritual kingdom instead of a physical one. Romulus appeared in immense glory, as befit his message of glory, but Jesus appeared in humble disguise, as befit his message of humility. And while Proculus receives his gospel on the road to Rome, Cleopas receives his gospel on the road from Jerusalem. So while the old story implies all roads lead to Rome, the new story implies all roads lead from Jerusalem. In almost every detail, the stories are identical or exactly the reverse. Another indicator of myth is the reification of imagination.
That's an interesting thread that I'd like to see followed further.
Yeah.
They're either identical or the reverse. Well, what criteria are used to determine which way they should go, whether they should have a positive polarity or a negative polarity? Was there conscious thought put into the process? It raises a lot of questions. They're not necessarily relevant to this debate, because simply showing the relationship demonstrates the mythological nature of the stories. But once again, just because these stories are myth does not necessarily mean the subject of the stories didn't exist.
Right.
Imaginary people into real people. In the Gospel of John, for example, a new character is invented, Lazarus, whom Jesus raises from the dead. An amazing event none of the other Gospels apparently had ever heard of. Suddenly appears in John. In John chapter 11, this Lazarus is identified as the one whom Jesus loved, who is later cited as a witness for the details of the crucifixion and resurrection, again appearing in those narratives exactly where none of the other Gospels ever imagined him before. And yet we know this Lazarus didn't exist, for he first appears in Luke's Gospel as a fictional person in a parable, where Jesus tells a story about a rich man burning in hell who sees a dead beggar named Lazarus in heaven. So he begs God to raise this Lazarus from the dead so he can warn his living brothers to avoid his own hellish fate. The parable ends with God refusing, telling him, if they will not listen to Moses and the prophets, neither will they be persuaded if someone rises from the dead. Notice what happens in John. He reverses the message of Luke's parable by having Jesus actually raise Lazarus from the dead, which convinces many people to turn and be saved. The very thing Luke's Jesus said wouldn't work. In fact, just as the rejected request in Luke's parable imagined Lazarus going to people and convincing them, John's Lazarus is then cited as a witness to the crucifixion and resurrection of Jesus, specifically to convince people. Again, what Luke's Jesus said wouldn't work.
It's a neat trick, that.
Yeah.
But also, I think God might be wrong on that one, because, I mean, I don't listen to Moses and the prophets because I don't believe Moses existed, and most of the prophecies are made up or after the fact or whatever. So I don't see any reason to follow what they say. But if, you know, someone I know is really, really dead, like say my grandmother came back to life and started telling me about the kingdom to come, I would fucking listen. That's very persuasive.
That's really weird, though. Like, I mean, if it was just a Lazarus, right, you'd say, hey, maybe two people had the same name. But the fact that they're both about resurrection, and in one it was denied and in one it occurred with this Lazarus, that's a problem, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I mean, they could very easily be different dudes. They could have had different names, but they were given the same name because the one specifically addresses the other for literary reasons.
Right, and they were both Lazarus of Bethany.
And do remember, folks, the Bible was by no means inevitable. The authors of the Gospels, they weren't writing with the idea of complementing each other. They were writing to compete with each other. So theirs could be the best-selling version of the Jesus story. This book exists because some other dude wanted to collect a bunch of books together, and the Central Church in Rome said, we need to own that because that's going to be the new bestseller. We need to make our own collection, do it better, and also kill that other guy just to make sure. That's the only reason the Bible fucking exists. There was never an original intention to have multiple conflicting accounts right next to each other, demonstrating how they're all full of lies. That was never the idea.
John has thus reified a fictional character and integrated him into the story where he never was before, in order to argue against the particular message in Luke, seeking instead to persuade people with the very outcome Luke said wouldn't persuade them. Another indicator of myth is the acceptance of wildly contradictory versions of the same myth. For example, Matthew's gospel wildly contradicts Mark's empty tomb narrative in almost every detail, elaborating it with incredible claims of posted guards and flying superhuman angels magically paralyzing people and hurling about tombstones. Again, in the empty tomb, I demonstrate where all these crazy changes came from. Matthew completely rewrote the empty tomb story in Mark in order to portray Jesus as a new Daniel in the lion's den, borrowing exact words, phrases, and details from the book of Daniel in order to construct this new story. Okay, I've only given you a few examples, but all the Gospels are full of mythical narratives like this, cover to cover, where stories are constructed symbolically, mining the Jewish scriptures and pagan myths for symbolic details. Histories are not written this way. These are myths, the telling of implausible tales that never happened, but are constructed with symbolic meaning. The Gospels routinely invent even very public events that never happened. Mark invents a darkness covering the whole world for 3 hours that no one else saw. Matthew invents a rock-splitting earthquake no one else noticed, as well as a horde of resurrected corpses parading into Jerusalem, leaving hundreds of empty tombs behind, which again, no other author had ever seen or heard of.
Or the historian, my zombie army, I love it. I mean, of course he was always going to mention this, but I'm still thrilled that he mentioned it.
Yeah. I love that it's in his opening and not his rebuttal. It's so now, you know, if Craig doesn't actually address it, then he's left a point on the table that is completely unrefuted, that the later Gospels, they seem to have these real wild fables in them, real wild stuff going on. It's almost like they're a myth that got more and more fabulous over time.
I do love it when things become more fabulous over time.
I should say fantastical, I guess, would be a more accurate word to say.
And on and on. As with these events, and Barabbas, and the guards of the tomb, and so on, the gospel authors routinely made up entire people and events, simply to communicate their message through symbols, metaphors, and parables. That means we can't trust anything they say is historical, since we know for a fact from these very examples and many others that they were writing symbolic fiction. We have no reason, therefore, to believe their empty tomb narratives or their appearance narratives were anything more than symbolic fiction as well. Even if some history is lost in there somewhere, having no other sources, we have no way of knowing which details are historical and which made up. And therefore, no evidence in the Gospels can be used to argue for the resurrection of Jesus. So we can't trust what the Gospels say. What do the epistles say? Paul says in
that exactly. Oh, it's like I've heard this before somewhere.
Yeah. Yeah.
You demolish the Gospels. Good job. And then you go, okay, let's move on to the epistles. What else have we got? Love it.
Yeah. Well, like you said, he's only got two sources, even though he says there's a wide array of independence. There's not. Like, that is absolutely not true. There are two sources. There is the Gospels and the epistles. That is all.
Yeah, that's pretty much it. Mark, I appreciate the thought, but I do hope I can continue to get more fabulous. I do have some way I'd like to go still.
I believe you will.
That's like we were talking about during that one Ken Ham thing. Perfection is less perfect than imperfection, because imperfection has the capacity for growth and improvement and adaptation and correction and so on and so on. And while perfection starts out perfect, imperfection has the potential to one day become, far greater. It's a long parable. We could play it another time, but but yeah, that's my whole thing. I mean, hell, you could build a whole theology off of that. Why does evolution happen? Because of imperfection. Right. And here we are, billions of years later. If the first cell was perfect, there would never be multicellular life. Because we're imperfect, we are far greater and capable of unbelievable shit that the first cell could never have even thought about doing,
Well, I think perfection is just conceptual. It's a conceptual thing. It's like infinity. It may not actually exist in reality at all. It's just a concept that we've invented. And so, I don't think there is such a thing.
Yeah, I think if you really break it down, I think the idea is incoherent, because if something is perfect at one thing, then it definitionally has to be imperfect at something else, and therefore it's not perfect.
Yeah.
And what do you mean by perfect? Quite a lot of that is subjective. Like,
at least that's my excuse when I need to slack off anyway.
Yeah. One of my favorite Teddy Roosevelt quotes.
Yeah.
We always must ensure to leave ourselves something to do tomorrow.
Yeah, that's good. Yeah. Okay. That's a really good excuse. Yeah, I like it. Or a lot to do tomorrow. So yeah.
Yeah, Oh, but my hat is perfect. I'll allow that one. I do like this hat. I like to change the flower bands around, but since I was going with blue today, actually I meant to change between shows, but I didn't have time because the earlier show ran late, and I had like 20 minutes to eat a meal between things and refill my coffee, and I'm just like, okay, we're just staying with this outfit. It's fine. It's fine though.
It works. It works. And I'm sorry, Mark, I don't mean to take the steam out of it was a lovely compliment, but it was tangent bait. You've got to admit it definitely was tangent bait. I don't blame you for that. That's entirely our fault, 100%.
It's true. It's true. No, I do appreciate it, but yeah, we do tend to tangent. It's what we do. Mm-hmm. And if you enjoy tangents, make sure you're subscribed, because I appreciate it. and it'll tell the algorithm to give you more of the shenanigans that we get up to over here.
Mm-hmm.
In Galatians 1, I make known to you, brethren, that the gospel I preached is not according to any man. For neither did I receive it from any man, nor was I taught it, except through a revelation of Jesus Christ, when it was the good pleasure of God to reveal his Son in me, so I could preach him among the Gentiles. I did not confer with flesh and blood right away, nor did I go to Jerusalem to see those who were apostles before me, but I went off into Arabia, and then back to Damascus. Then only after 3 years did I go to Jerusalem to visit Cephas. And even then, I remained unknown by face to any of the churches in Judea. So Paul tells us he received the gospel by revelation, not human testimony. What gospel does he mean? He tells us that in 1 Corinthians 15. For I make known to you, brethren, the gospel that I preached to you, which you also accepted, and in which you now stand. For I delivered to you, first of all, what I also received, that according to the scriptures, Christ died for our sins, and that he was buried, and that according to the scriptures, he was raised on the third day, and that he appeared to Cephas and many others, and last of all, he appeared also to me. Note that Paul began
hold on a second. If Paul didn't go and talk to people, how did he have 500 witnesses?
Maybe the same holy hallucination that told him about Jesus also told him about the witnesses?
Okay, that's weird. I thought he went and talked to these witnesses. Oh, sorry, just one second.
Yeah, I was of the understanding that's what he did as well, because the whole premise of Luke is that he was Paul's assistant and he did the actual interviewing. Or at least as I understand it. I could misunderstand. That's a thing I'm capable
maybe
of.
I'm misunderstanding as well. That's weird.
Yeah.
Both statements in Galatians and 1 Corinthians with the exact same phrase. I make known to you, brethren, that this is the gospel I preached. So Paul tells us the gospel he preached was not handed down to him through any human testimony. He learned it directly from God through a revelation. And he says this in the same gospel he handed down. He says this is the same gospel he handed down to his congregations. He even went on preaching it for 3 whole years before he spoke to any apostles about it, and even says that in all that time he was completely unknown to anyone in Judea. Now, modern science has confirmed that experiences like this are commonly hallucinations. In fact, we have no scientific evidence that any such visions are not hallucinations. And since fully realistic visions like this happen throughout the world, confirming countless contradictory sects and traditions, we can be sure of one thing. Even if any of these experiences are real, most of them by far are not. The burden is therefore on anyone who would claim his visions real and all others hallucinatory. But there's no evidence that confirms these early Christian visions were an exception. So most likely they were hallucinations, just like all other religious visions in history, as many scholars argue. Paul even tells us what inspired these hallucinations. He says the scriptures told him the Christ would rise from the dead. So, inspired by scripture, he and others hallucinated a Jesus telling them exactly that. And Paul makes no relevant distinction between his experience and anyone else's. As far as the epistles tell us, as far as we can tell, all the apostles learned of the resurrection of Jesus through scripture-inspired hallucinations. Since there is no evidence in the epistles of the apostles having any evidence for the resurrection other than religious...
Say that 5 times fast. There's no evidence in the epistles of the apostles having...
There was no evidence of the epistles of the apostles. How many epistles could an apostle write if an apostle had to write epistles?
Oh, no. What if a pissed off apostle wrote...
Oh! How many epistles would a pissed off apostle write if a pissed off apostle could write epistles? No, that's not impressive, anarchic cops. What's impressive is saying Irish wristwatch. Give it a try.
When I was little, I used to do tongue twisters like that just to be like, I don't know, maybe I had like a certain flavor of the tism or something, but I didn't have any trouble with any of them ever. But as I got older, and I don't know if it's my aphasia or what the deal is, but I can't do any of them anymore.
I don't know. I'm okay at them. There's certain things I enunciate well and certain ones that I don't. So yeah, it's pretty insane, right? Just Irish wristwatch is damn hard to say for some reason. I don't know why. It just is.
That's why Irish people carry pocket watches.
Right, exactly. I think that's a bit racist, but sure.
I'm half Irish. It's fine.
Oh, okay, cool. You're reclaiming the stereotype then. No worries.
That's right. We are a proud people.
Do you have a pocket watch?
I do, actually. I have
there you go.
And I've got
all right,
3 pocket
beautiful.
watches.
Beautiful.
Yeah.
Nations, Paul never mentions, for example, the discovery of an empty tomb. And since we know hallucinations are fabrications of the mind, these experiences cannot be used as evidence for an actual resurrection of Jesus. Instead, the epistles prove the early Christians were frequent hallucinators. Paul had visions quite often. Several times in his letters, he mentions receiving commandments and instructions directly from the heavenly Jesus. He once even relates an entire conversation he had with God. And he implies he or someone he knew had actually visited heaven in one of these visions and saw and heard all kinds of marvelous things there. And it's clear Paul completely believes all of this.
Paul knew Kat Kerr? No shit.
Yeah.
She gets around. I knew she was old, but damn.
Paul reveals that many other Christians in his churches were hallucinating on a regular basis as well. He writes entire sections about the brethren entering ecstatic trances and prophesying and relaying communications of spirits and speaking in tongues. The book of Acts confirms all of this, including several instances of Christians having visions of beings and objects in the sky that no one else saw. This was happening so frequently in Christian churches that Paul even had to establish rules for it. Now, science has documented a particular type of person called a schizotypal personality, who frequently hallucinates, but unlike the full-blown schizophrenic, is not impaired by their hallucinations, but instead gains comfort and confidence from them. In antiquity, such people would obviously gravitate toward the acceptance of ecstatic religious movements, like the many mystical Jewish sects of the time, which also reported hallucinations they took to be real communications from God.
And cultural context, that's a thing that was also culturally accepted in other context. Like the oracles of Delphi did this sort of shit.
Right.
You know, seers all over the place. Yeah.
Yeah. And that wasn't the only religion in Judea at the time. There was other ones knocking around. It's just that Christianity was the one that came out on top. There was other stuff as well. Like everybody believed in supernatural things because there were things they couldn't explain, like lightning from the sky and, you know, floods happening and fires and things like that. Of course, there were things they couldn't explain.
Yeah, there was so much. The area, first of all, it was the crossroads of the fucking empire. So you had people of every kind of belief going through the area. But also the locals, you know, historians like Josephus tell us there were 100 freaking cults just like Christianity, you know, apocalyptic Jewish heretics running around saying they're the chosen one, many of whom also claim to have rose from the dead. The only real significant difference with Jesus is Paul, because it's Paul's version of Christianity that caught on, not, you know, the one that the early Christians were spreading, which is weird. But then there's also other Abrahamic faiths like the Druze who hung around. I mean, there's still Druze in the area today, although they did get run off into the desert a few times. And there's the mishmash people who have like little bits of the Greek beliefs and little bits of the Jewish beliefs and little bits of the Egyptian beliefs and so on and so forth. The Persian, the leftovers of the fallen Babylonian Empire. And we see this in the Quran. You know, Muhammad grew up in an area where there was kind of like a blend of all the regional beliefs and people didn't really have a strict dogma. And he just kind of slid into it, you know?
And not to mention, there's still the Jews around who, you know, obviously were in the area at the time and didn't believe that Jesus rose from the dead. Even though there's, you know, they're telling us there's all this amazing, convincing evidence, but you couldn't even convince people at the time.
Yeah. Including people who ostensibly knew Jesus. Like, there were... They make a big deal out of the fact that his non-believing younger brother was converted. But what about the rest of his fucking family?
Yeah.
Why were they not convinced? You know?
Yeah.
The Christians came from this very background. We now know many modern examples of such movements, the Shakers, the Santeros, the cargo cults, which arise, like Christianity did, in subcultures that sanction and revere hallucinatory experience, treating it as genuine and authoritative. Now, if someone came knocking on your door and told you Victor Hugo...
Pal makes a valid point. Judaism itself is also a palimpsest of different mythologies.
Yeah.
And we see that in the Old Testament too. You know, in Genesis, we've got the story of Marduk cut and pasted. But in Job, we have an entirely different God. And in the Garden of Eden, it's a very different Yahweh, head god person, I guess El,
Yep.
whatever, whichever version it is, then the one who did the creating. In the beginning of Genesis, we get this almighty creator who speaks reality into being. And by the time we get around to Eden, just a couple of chapters later, we've got this bumbling idiot that his literally days old humans are able to hide from.
Yeah.
It's a big power difference.
Yeah, and you cannot ignore the parallels between the Noah's flood narrative and the Epic of Gilgamesh, and before that the Atrahasis. That you have this progression of stories, all with the same narrative kind of focus, with such similarities that you're like, was that copied?
Yeah, and there's leftovers in there too. I mean, it's a topic for another time, one that we have discussed and will definitely discuss again in other situations. But it's fascinating to look into the stuff. Like, the biblical scholarship is cool, but the pre-biblical scholarship is fucking mind-blowing.
Right.
Hugo had risen from the dead. And you asked them how they knew that, and all they could tell you was that Mr. Hugo had appeared to them in a vision.
Definitely a top hat, Ed. Definitely. They're so classy. In fact, I'm tempted to grab mine now and see if I can add it to this stack I've got going here.
And told them so. And then you visited their church and saw everyone there was channeling spirits and speaking in tongues and having visions of angels and strange objects in the sky. Would you believe them? No, you wouldn't. Yet these early Christians were exactly like this. And the epistles tell us they had their information about Jesus from no other sources than these: visions, revelations, and communications from the spirit world. That's not going to convince you Victor Hugo rose from the dead, so it shouldn't convince you Jesus did either. Okay, what about the body? Since the Gospels can't be trusted, and the epistles never mention a missing body, it's quite possible there was none. The Christians may have simply believed there was, and rejected all evidence to the contrary as a trick. A friend of mine, a colleague of mine, even told me that he had a conversation with Dr. Craig in which he presented evidence, if there was evidence refuting the resurrection, Dr. Craig said he would dismiss it as a trick. So the first Christians may have done so too. Or they might have believed, as I argue in The Empty Tomb, that Jesus rose in an entirely new body, leaving the old one still in the tomb. We'll be debating that possibly later. In the book of Acts, for example, however, the authorities show no knowledge of any body having gone missing. There are no accusations of theft or escape, no investigations, nothing. Christians aren't questioned about it, which entails either the author of Acts is hiding something, or there was no missing body for the authorities to question or investigate or make accusations about.
That is fascinating, because I've always been told that the author of Luke and the author of Acts are the same person, but now they're telling different stories.
I don't know. I don't think. No, it didn't. Who wrote Acts? Oh, yeah, it does say it's traditionally believed to be Luke the evangelist. That's interesting.
Yeah. So that's
why would he write about this in Luke but not in Acts?
Unless the order is reversed, like Acts is supposed to be his reporting work while he was working with Paul, and then he wrote Luke later as sort of like he sees all these other gospels running around, and he thinks to himself, I have a better understanding than everybody else because I've done the journalism, so I'm going to throw my own version out there. And by that point, he's seen the other gospels and he's been exposed to the ideas.
But wasn't they supposed to be written around the same time? It was like a 2-part work of Luke and Acts. Like I don't know. It's weird. I don't.
Yeah, it's very. As Ed says, it's the one major thing that speaks against Luke and Acts being the same author.
Right.
And yet, even if a body really did go missing, most missing bodies don't go missing because they rose from the dead. So to prove this missing body is different, you have to rule out all the other ways bodies usually go missing. And we can't do that with the evidence we have.
Right.
That's a solid point. I mean, for all we know, freaking rats ate it. Or as often happens in flood-prone areas, a flood came and washed the body away. Like, we need to demonstrate it wasn't a natural thing before we can even begin to think about it being fucking magic.
Yeah, and that's why I want to push back against William Lane's Craig. Well, it's plausible kind of thing. You haven't even shown it's possible, Dr. Lane Craig. You have not even shown it's possible for this to occur, much less plausible. There are many, many much more plausible explanations than something we've never seen is in some way tied to something supernatural. I feel fancy all of a sudden. I feel very round and fancy.
I keep remembering. So as many of you know, I still use this StreamYard account to do a whole bunch of different production. So right before the show, I was switching it back over from the transposition setting, which I use to record good news sometimes. And so I have to change everything. So, we made it over 2 hours into the show before I remembered to turn our freaking names back on.
Yeah.
And just now I remembered I have this specifically for us to do these reviews with.
Well, and Mark,
we could be over here, or we could do
Mark
this.
Seth Smith makes a good point, like Occam's razor, but Occam's razor would sort of say that what would account for all variables, the simplest explanation, especially for Paul not mentioning the empty tomb story at all, the most simplest explanation is that people made it up later. That's the simplest explanation with the least amount of entities in it. Just one dude made it up in Mark. It was copied into Luke. This is the simplest explanation.
Yeah. And I dare say it's even plausible.
And it is plausible.
Now let's step back and actually think about what Craig wants you to believe here. A walking corpse, indeed, according to the Gospels, a flying and teleporting corpse, could have visited Pontius Pilate, Herod Antipas, the Sanhedrin, the population of Jerusalem, the Roman legions, even the Emperor and Senate of Rome. He could have flown to America and preached to the natives, as the Mormons actually believe he did. Or even to China, preaching in all the temples and courts of Asia. In fact, being God, he could have appeared to everyone on earth. He could visit me right now, or you. He could appear on this stage. And yet, instead, Craig believes Jesus only appeared to a few small groups of his already fanatical followers in Judea, and just one other obscure guy in the desert of Damascus, just one brief time, 2,000 years ago, and that's it. If Jesus was a God and really wanted to save us all, he wouldn't do that. He would have appeared and delivered his gospel personally to the whole world. But if Christianity originated...
That's an issue that's been an issue since the early days.
Yeah.
If he can appear to anybody, first of all, Paul, why the fuck did he appear to you? And second, why doesn't he appear to me?
Right. Yeah, so that's the question. It is why a God with such power, who necessarily wants you to believe that he exists, doesn't appear and actually say something to you. Why only appear to those people who already sincerely and fervently believe that they exist, who have to convince themselves that it is real first before they get this evidence, right? Because it is never somebody who is doubting that they appear to. It's never somebody that goes, well, I don't believe it, but I'm happy if he appears. He doesn't just appear, right? But he wants you to believe. So either one of two things is true. Either A, he's not all-powerful, because this would be a triviality to an all-powerful God, or two, he doesn't want you to believe. So this is an incoherent set of attributes for the God. One of those has to be false. And often theists say, oh, but he doesn't want to change free will by appearing to you. But he did for Paul. So that didn't change Paul's free will. Paul could have said, hey, no, I've seen you, but I'm still going to go out and unalive Christians. So if it doesn't change his free will, why would it change mine?
Yeah, or Lucifer's. That's the one that gets brought up a lot. Lucifer fucking knew, and he still rebelled. So knowing doesn't affect your ability to choose whatever the hell you want.
Yeah. And it's always people that believe already.
Strangely enough.
It's but the same is true for anything. Ghosts only appear to those people that believe already. Muhammad only appears to those people that believe already. Everything only appears. It's almost like people that believe are susceptible to seeing what they want to see rather than something actually being there and we all see it.
Except
that
there is one cryptid called the paradoxologue, and it's only real for people who don't believe in it. So,
okay,
I mean, the fact I've never seen one is proof that that's how that works.
Wow. That I'm not even going to go down how many ways that is irrational and illogical, but sure.
It's a paradoxologue. That's what it does.
It's really not. That's a beautiful case of affirming the consequent, right? If the Paxodorolite is real and we would expect not to see it, we don't see it, therefore it's real. You know, this is the thing that they're doing. But the divine hiddenness is the same. Its divine hiddenness is true. We would expect not to see a God. We don't see a God. Therefore, divine hiddenness is true. Like it's the same argument. I love that because it's exactly the same argument as divine hiddenness.
Yeah, it's also the Odinist argument. Odin promised no more frost giants, and behold, we don't see any frost giants.
Right.
Odin kept his word.
Yet Jesus promised to come back and save us, and we haven't seen neither hide nor hair of Jesus. And Jesus promised it before some people before him would have tasted death, which is, I'm going to go out on a limb and say none of the people from Jesus' time are still alive. Radical, I know. That's a big, you know, I'm putting myself out there, but I'm just saying. I'm going to stand by that one.
Yeah, and of course there's excusegetics around that one too. Oh, well, one of the disciples was gifted immortality, even though that's not in any of the scriptures, etc., etc.
Nope.
And I don't even care how stupid that excuse is. The fact that you have to come up with an excuse for it should tell you your beliefs are fucking irrational. But maybe I just have, you know, well,
but what gets me is the long line of apologists that have all claimed this is happening like imminently, and people still believe the next one to come along and say it. It's amazing. Like there's been a massive line of people that have sort of claimed to know when this is going to happen, and they've all been wrong. Yet you'll believe the next one. What? Like seriously? I don't know why. It's weird.
Yeah, I filled up my end of the world punch card several apocalypses ago. I still have to turn it in for my free slushie.
Oh, that's even better. Beheaded Kamikaze, I thought you said paradoxolotl. That is awesome. That is just awesome. I love that. I do like axolotls, though. They're absolutely fantastic. Paradoxolotl.
Yeah, sure.
There you go, Andrew. We need a picture of a paradoxolotl. That's what we need a picture of.
Ay.
Inspired by schizotypal hallucinations, like every other vision-based religion, like the Shakers or cargo cults, then we'd expect it to arise in only one small group, in one small place and time, exactly where schizotypes were respected as prophets and their hallucinations believed to be divine communications, and exactly where ideas of resurrections and messiahs were already heavily preached and believed in. And that's exactly when and where it began. A natural explanation thus predicts all the evidence we have, whereas Craig only has an unnatural explanation, which is entirely falsified by predicting things we don't see at all. Now, one last point I'll make in the given time that I have. Dr. Craig has on other debates, for example, in his debate with Victor Stenger, said that if there are natural explanations available, we should prefer those to supernatural explanations. I've given you fairly good naturalistic explanations for how the evidence came to exist. There isn't any evidence to refute those naturalistic explanations. We can't rule them out. So what we have here is an argument that completely bypasses what Dr. Craig is talking about. A lot of the points he made are actually irrelevant in light of what I've argued here today.
Yes, correct.
Now, he's said one thing in particular that I'll respond to in my last minute here. He pointed out that I actually argue that Jesus didn't exist. That's not strictly speaking true. I argue that it's a hypothesis that needs to be considered that I find persuasive, but I have consistently argued in public many times that this is a theory, this is a hypothesis that needs to be subjected to peer review, needs to be moved through and generate a consensus before we can argue it. So in this debate here today, I am completely assuming that the consensus is correct, that Jesus existed. I'm even agreeing with Dr. Craig's argument that Jesus was buried. Completely agree with that. That's the consensus position. Until we can actually argue against it and present evidence against it, we should go with that. And the appearances, I also agree, obviously, that there were appearances, but I argue that the appearances were hallucinations. There isn't really any evidence to discount that. And I'll end with that, and we'll continue more later on.
Well, hooray! He stuck to 20 minutes.
Wow.
He could have easily claimed extra time, and also the book thump at the end. Love it.
Yeah, that was very precise. But yeah, it's I think that I mean, William Lane Craig's was so much more meandering and clutching at straws and talking about irrelevant things. You know, talking about how hard they believed it. How they did all of these things based upon their belief. That does not address whether it was true, sir. It doesn't. And this is how apologetics works. You get them discussing something absolutely tangential to what the actual subject is, which what evidence do we have that the resurrection in fact happened?
Yeah, and it's like Carrier points out, like this is a potential null hypothesis that has never been really seriously addressed. And if you're not posing a null hypothesis, then nobody can take your positive hypothesis really very seriously, which I suppose answers Cam's question, coincidentally, since I got this debate from Cam's list.
Right.
Should people take atheism seriously? Well, why would anyone take what you're saying seriously? Because no one's ever seriously tried to justify your position. I mean, Craig will bend over backwards to make excuses, but no one has ever seriously capturing Christianity.
Okay.
Another channel.
What do you say? What do you say?
He did a video about why apologists shouldn't take atheism seriously anymore, because we're not even trying to address the same arguments we've debunked dozens of times for decades. Well, if you're not going to play in our sandbox anymore, we're not going to take you seriously.
Well, I mean, I guess you don't. Like, you don't have to take anything seriously. It's up to you. But you've got to live in a world with atheists. We're not going anywhere. You know, I'm not sure what. Like, that's a really weird thing to say. It'd be sort of me like saying, why should I take any religious people seriously? Because they believe a thing that I don't think is true. Shouldn't you take somebody that you think is wrong seriously? Or are you just going to, you know, pretend they don't exist?
Well, it kind of goes to show the inherent dishonesty in the apologist position, because as we often say, we keep looking at this shit not just because it's funny, and it often is. It does have great entertainment value, at least I think so.
Right.
But it also has educational value, and like we learned some cool shit about history tonight.
Yeah,
but
absolutely.
Also, because of the intellectual humility of acknowledging I could be wrong, and if I'm wrong, I want to know, I want to learn about that. And it's not the same on the other side of things. It's always the presumption of I'm right, and you have to show me otherwise, and I still won't accept anything you say about it, you know?
Right. Yeah. And here's the thing, and this is what I've noticed, is that when you ask like these types of Christians, what would convince you you're wrong about this? Nothing can. Like, they would say, no, absolutely, show me Jesus's body, which of course is an impossibility. If Jesus was a myth, you certainly couldn't show his body because he never freaking existed, right? I'm not a mythicist, but if that is the case, then you never could show the body of a person that never, it would be like, show me Achilles' body, or else he absolutely exists. Show me, you know, Romulus and Remus's body. If you can't, then they were gods. That doesn't address the issue. And even if I showed you his body, it has nothing to do with it. It's so weird. But I think that, I mean, and we've got to hit briefly on Low Bar Bill here. You know, so I think what we are what we're looking at is where the epistemic bar for Jesus having done all this different stuff and Jesus being real is so far down. Yet the epistemic bar for not believing it, not even, you know, demonstrating it didn't happen, which is really hard to do. How do you demonstrate that something didn't happen? It's very difficult to do. But the bar for showing at least that it's not plausible and we shouldn't believe it is so high. Like, we've got to logically demonstrate that it was impossible under a Christian narrative of omnipotent God for a body to get up and walk out of a tomb. And that is ridiculous. What else do we do that with? You know, like, how could I logically demonstrate that the Loch Ness Monster is impossible? Logically. I can't. It's impossible.
It's a parallel with everything else we encounter in apologetics. Yeah. Like, they will often resort to God of the gaps, incredulity, yep. argument from consequence, whatever. You know, oh, well, the universe began to exist. There must be a universer. All kinds of absolute first grade bullshit, and think they can get away with it. But at the same time, if you don't have PhD level knowledge in astrophysics, chemistry, abiogenesis, fucking ERVs, then if there's any gap in your knowledge, that's where God goes. Therefore, God, I win. Yeah. Fucking and wild.
But what gets me is the way that they use philosophy to widen that gap, right? But in a place where there is no gap, they'll sort of go, well, you can't logically demonstrate that that thing doesn't exist. So there's still room there as they desperately try to pull that gap apart in order to squeeze a God in there. And you, of course, being honest, say, well, no, there's no way I can logically demonstrate that a God doesn't exist. There's nothing, you know, illogical about that, because logic is a set of rules. But that doesn't mean it exists, right? Like, logically, I can't demonstrate that unicorns, leprechauns, or fairies don't exist. Logically, there's no problem. And we've got to separate the idea of what is logical and what is reasonable. And it seems like the reasonability bar for atheists is through the roof, because they're not being intellectually consistent. I could do the same with flat earth. I could say, hey, you can't logically demonstrate why it's impossible. And if you can't do that, then I'm justified in my belief. You can do that with anything, literally anything. You could do that with absolutely anything in the world. Unless it's sort of, you know, the internally inconsistent logically, but that doesn't mean you should believe it. It's wild. It's absolutely wild.
Yeah, and I imagine it's going to continue to get even spicier, because there's still 2 rounds of rebuttals and closing arguments, and there will be some interplay because they'll actually be responding to each other and shit. So,
but I think this Cameron, whoever he is, I think it's probably got more to do with his inability to provide evidence for the claims that he's making rather than what he says. Because I've noticed that apologists do that. When they get stuck, they will say, well, I'm not even going to consider any other position. I'm right because I'm right, because I'm right, because I'm right, because I'm right, because I'm right.
Yeah, it's pretty much, I mean, we see that with all kinds of other fallacious positions, although apologists are the most obvious about it. Just stick the fingers in the ears and be like, la, 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 I can't hear you. I'm still right.
Yeah.
Because it's not about learning. It's not about being correct. It's not about living a better life. It's just about being right.
Yes, and holding on to that faith. But here's the thing, like, believing you're right doesn't make you right. It just means that you don't think you can be wrong. And so the people that are saying, hey, I could be wrong, are way more honest and you know, evaluating that I could be wrong. Sure, absolutely. Show me a God. Show me anything like a God. But instead you get these people coming in and going, just ask for God with your heart. How did that work?
Well, there is a ritual.
Oh, wow.
Kalima.
The Kaliman. Yeah, it's just nonsense. You know, this whole thing of look with your heart, it means convince yourself and then you'll believe it. Well, yeah, no joke. that works for everything. That works for flat earth. It works for fairies in your garden. It works for literally anything. And so if your method for whether your epistemology for whether you believe something is when you convince yourself you will believe it, that is literally the worst epistemology I could ever turn to. That doesn't tell you what is real. It just means you're fooling yourself into thinking something can't be wrong. That's all. Are you summoning the Ollie Man? Absolutely. Every time. Every time. Ollie Man. Look,
we
I
do
have
need
a
a Canadian.
Yeah, I absolutely love summoning Canadians.
An official Canadian, not any of these
And
random.
so look at this in chat. As soon as you have objections to their religion, oh, it's evolution. Yeah, stay on subject. Why can't you stay on subject? Why do you have to go to something absolutely irrelevant? Because evolution could be completely and utterly false, and it still doesn't prove a god.
What?
That's the problem.
But Mark, how else could things possibly be this way? It's one or the other, isn't it?
Magic. It was magic. It was a magical fox by the name of Silly Morpheus that did it all.
Okay. I mean, you
prove
said
me
it.
wrong.
I'm convinced by
if you can't logically disprove it, then I am justified in my belief. That's how it works, apparently, these days. Ridiculous.
Yeah, it's true. And just declaring things too, like, just declare it's a historical fact that the silly fox has been seen by thousands of witnesses, and
500 people saw this fox. 500 people. Who were they? Couldn't tell you, but 500 people. I saw it in a dream. Because apparently spectral evidence, which we threw out of court ages ago, is apparently now a substitute for actual evidence of things. Paul had a vision. Big whoop. It was Lisa the Rainbow Giraffe, yeah. Yep.
No, it was Nil, the great not god and creator of creator gods. This is established canon. There's Nil up in the corner. And
it was the Blarney stone, the magical stone which created everything. I sense a crusade coming on.
I was earlier today, Godless Granny had breakfast tacos on, who's been, as you're probably aware, but others may not be, he's been trying out an atheist presuppositional apologetic. And it's not quite perfect. It's still got a few rough edges, but it's pretty hilarious. And
what is it? Do you know what it is?
It's basically the same as your tag argument, except it's quantum foam, or quantum universal quantum field rather. Yeah, everything is an emergent property from the necessary thing, which is the universal quantum field.
Well, usually transcendental points to something that can't be part of our universe, something that transcends some sort of...
Yeah, it doesn't include an actual transcendent. It's just the same.
Oh, okay, gotcha, but it's very similar. Yeah, gotcha. So because the universal quantum foam exists, I don't know how you'd get to it. Is it trying to promote atheism? Is that what you're saying? It's trying to conclude with there is no God?
Nominally, but it's really just sort of a joke that Tacos thinks is hilarious because it makes the precept argument, but it does it in a way that makes more sense.
Well, I mean, I've seen precept arguments from atheists before, and they really just do run along the lines of you only presuppose physical naturalistic mechanisms, and that's it. Like, that's all you got to presuppose, is that supernatural things don't exist.
And that's pretty much it.
You're done. God's done at that point. If you presuppose that only natural things exist, you're done.
Yeah, I mean, it's exactly the same trick as the theistic precept, where you've got your if not premise 1, your unspoken premise 0 is God exists. If you assume your conclusion, if you beg the question, no matter how big you make the circle, it's still circular.
Mm-hmm.
So But I mean, you know, I despise pre-sup. It's so fucking stupid. But that
I
was
find
kind
it
of amusing. Yeah.
I kind of find that the people that run it are usually really obnoxious about it, and that's what I don't like about it. Usually they're very bullish and very insulting and very obnoxious about it. But I find the actual arguments kind of funny because they're all just begging the question. They're all just making this simple logical fallacy and just refusing to admit it, basically, like just refusing to admit that they're actually putting in something where they quite obviously are. And as long as they refuse to admit it, they're not doing it. It's just like, what? Like, it's just so funny. It's actually hilarious, and there's a few really good counters to it, you know.
Oh yeah. So sometimes you can definitely have fun with it. Like people who've been around
Yeah.
for a while may recall that back when Dave Warnock was doing his show, he had apostasy on, and they encountered a pre-sup call-in, and neither of them knew how to handle it. And
Right.
somebody asked me to review that one, so I did, and it just,
Okay.
I mean, the argument is it's not only dumb,
Yep.
but because it has to run on that pre-scripted track, you can
Yes,
fuck with
yep.
them so hard, because once you know their script, you can move them around like a chess piece, and
Yes.
it's pretty wild.
Well, I've got my own way of dealing with pre-suppers. Usually they're going to appeal to some kind of inability for any knowledge to come except through a God kind of thing. So you like, I think I would, and they kind of appeal to almost a solipsistic kind of worldview. And I think I would probably encourage you to lean into it rather than try to evade it. Like, just lean completely into their nonsense, because it ends up looking like nonsense when you lean right into it.
Oh yeah, yeah.
Because,
It's one of Plato's tactics was, when somebody makes an absurd argument, go with it. Yes, and that shit
Mhm.
to the extreme to demonstrate
Yeah.
how absurd it is.
Yeah.
I've tried that a couple of times. Sometimes it's fun. Like somebody goes with that whole, oh well, you have to presuppose your senses thing. I'm like, you know what? You're right. We're all brains and vats. In fact, since you can't be sure I exist, you're the only brain in a vat, and I'm just a figment of your imagination. And just see where they go with it, because what's the point of arguing with your own hallucination?
Yeah. And if I am a hallucination, why are you talking to me?
And why am I arguing back? What's wrong with you should see a psychiatrist, except that would also
The
be a figment of your
psychiatrist would also
imagination.
be, yeah. So they sort of say, well, how do you know what's real in the world around you? And you're sort of like, well, my senses, and I presuppose my senses are correct. And they're like, aha, you've made a presupposition. It's like, yeah, because I've got to. It's the only thing that is coming in as input. Like, we've got a lot of evidence to suggest that, because they want to conflate absolute knowledge with a reasonable certainty. Like, we have reasonable certainty that our senses are correct. We've got a lot of evidence for it. They come to us directly, and we know that they can be mistaken, but generally they describe the world around us. Now, we've got to presuppose that, but that's okay, because I'll allow you to do the same. If you know, and they'll say, yes, but my senses, and this thing comes from God. And it's like, well, I'll allow that your senses are real. I disagree with the God thing. Show that they come from a God, and you can go from there. And if they say, well, you can't presuppose your senses, you're like, well, then you're validating my senses by engaging with me.
Mm-hmm.
You're absolutely validating my presupposition.
Yeah, and it's not unsupported. Like, we are getting confirmatory data from multiple inputs. Like, when I talk to someone, they can hear my words, but also see my lips move. And if they're standing close enough, they'll feel the wind of my speech,
And they will smell your lovely perfume and, all of that stuff. It's just, but yeah. Can I be absolutely certain? Like, no, I can't be absolutely certain of almost anything. But at least we have some evidence for that. like, you know, my senses, your senses, some evidence for it. Whereas when you claim those senses come from a god, where's your evidence of that?
Yeah, just claims, just wishes, just happy-go-lucky. Not even happy-go-lucky. It's actually kind of miserable, isn't it? But that's a whole other topic unto itself. Want to do part 2 on this one?
Yeah. I'd love to. Absolutely love to. I love these things. I really do. I'm having a blast. And Carrier, very young, very inexperienced, but still had some really good points. William Lane Craig, he's very good on the rhetoric and sort of putting these things together. I note as well that William Lane Craig had the benefit of, you know, a big projector behind him, but Carrier didn't seem to be using it, which is kind of a little bit suspicious. You would hope that he offered it to Carrier. You know, but I thought he did very well considering the brevity. And William Lane Craig, he really went on the apologetics track. Like I said, he's a philosopher, not a historian. So no historian would stand up there and take the tracks that William Lane Craig would take. You know, I think a historian would, you know, give the evidence for Jesus being a person and that the Bibles could be correct. But I don't think they would take the track of, these are historical facts. The tomb was found empty. I don't think a real historian would do that. I think they would say, hey, the tomb may have been empty considering the stories that were told, but they wouldn't say that's historical fact. Like, they wouldn't. Historians on the subject are really, like I said, you know how good a historian is by the amount of caveats that they stuff in front of what they're saying.
That makes me think of a few of Habermas's performances, how he doesn't do that.
Yep.
In fact, he just outright makes shit up. I'll never forget that interview he did on The Shroud, where I think it was Cam from Capturing Christianity who said, as a historian, what do you set as the probability that the Shroud is legit? And Habermas. Jesus Christ. Why am I... My brain is made of meat. Habermas goes, 50, 80%, depending on what kind of mood I'm in. Like, you're just making this shit up based on your vibes? What?
But he's not a historian either. He has no degree in history. Habermas is a doctor of philosophy. Again, it's a philosopher in the thing. And, you know, that's not to say he knows nothing about the history of the, you know, sort of period, but, you know, he's got degrees in theology and philosophy, not history.
But it's still such bad philosophy.
Well, yeah.
It's infuriating, but, you know.
Well, it's not like the type of philosophy it is apologetics. You know, that is the type that they're doing. They are working as apologists first and, you know, academics later kind of thing. They're theologians. They're apologetics. That's what they're doing. And so I think, I don't know. I think they can cross over, but yeah, if you're taking purely academic philosophy, it would be pretty bad, but they're not. They're being apologists first and foremost.
Yeah, I get that. I feel like that with Hugh Ross. You know, this man, he's tangents upon tangents, but he's an astrophysicist, which was my original primary field, and he doesn't do it anymore. He uses what science he still remembers to twist it around and present false things in order to bolster his apologism, because being an apologist pays a lot more than being a physicist.
Oh yeah.
And it's disgusting.
Yeah, they can write books, they can get all kinds of endorsements. The church pays them very well to do speeches and things like that. They can do very, very well. Sure.
Yep. There are 3 types of lies: damn lies, and statistics.
I think so. Statistics can be incredibly useful, but the problem is when you try to apply statistics which absolutely govern general populations of things, and you try to apply it to individual things, right? When you try to apply it to, you know, like just because you've got a demographic, 90% of people do this, you try to apply it to an individual. It can be a problem. And then you have hacking issues. Statistics, it's not that statistics is terrible, it's that people apply statistics in terrible ways. That's basically the problem. That people apply things that statistics are not designed to apply. The law of large numbers says statistics works. It does. Like, as we get a bigger and bigger sample size, it does tell us more and more accurately what the actual probability of events is. However, you still can't apply it to individuals. You can't.
Yeah. Any outcome within the plausible range is a valid outcome.
Mm-hmm. And correlation is terrible. You know, like, people use correlation in the worst ways, like the worst ways.
It's true. Like, for example, it's been shown through statistical study that people who join patreon.com/betterthanember have better lives.
Yeah. Do you want to pull some number out of your butt there to, 86% of people have
I'd be a little bit more humble because out of all the people who've signed up to my Patreon, only about half are still there. So, something like 52% of people.
Okay. That's fine. Be conservative if you want. Yeah, no, like, a lot of statistics are just made up, like they really are. So
yeah, they're not legit statistics. They're just numb, and they're outsized and etc. But it is an absolute fact that people who join memberships on this channel are happier by some measurable but yet ephemeral degree, because they get custom emojis.
Yeah, I think it's the emojis. That's what I think it is.
And also a ton of exclusive content, the occasional random live stream when I have the time. We all do what we can, and folks, I do a lot. I'm currently working 5 jobs, and I would like to stop doing that at some point. But also, I do news over at the Transpositions. Catch us Thursdays at 8 p.m. Eastern. And, Mark and I do this every weekend. And I try to produce content for this channel. There's a video out from this past week, and I'm working on another one. It'll be a ton of fun, but I am working on it. We all do what we can when we can. And I appreciate those of you who are doing what you can to try to support my shenanigans and others in the community. It means a lot. It really, really does, because I am so very tired. But I love hanging out with you folks, seeing you all in the live chat.
Yeah, it's the best.
And I mean, as I always say, that's the reason we do lives instead of just pre-recording these things.
Yeah, and if you would like to see part 2, swing by my channel. I should link that as well. I should do I promote everybody in the world but myself, to be honest with you. I don't know what that is, like, seriously. It's just I'll probably like, oh, go join this channel, go join that channel, and I'll forget about my own. Just because I'm so excited about everybody.
I actually got lectured about that earlier today, which is probably why I thought about it. Yeah. Kat the Humanist was like, why don't you talk about what you do? I'm like, well, because I've got other shit to talk about.
Oh, Kat, I really hate to break it to you, mate. I'm worse than Ember, so you're gonna, if you hate Ember, you're gonna hate me.
Oh, Kat doesn't hate me. Just like you need to. We all need a little poke and reminder.
Okay. I'll revise that. If you hate Ember's marketing, you're gonna hate mine. All right. So yeah,
I know we need marketing managers, is what we need.
Yeah, probably.
But yeah, there's Mark's channel. It's also linked in the description if you're watching in the future. Hello, future people. Make sure you're subscribed. There's aimbots on my Tuesdays. Fundamentalist fails on my Thursdays, and of course the debate reviews.
Have you given out all of your Emberships for this month? Because I keep forgetting to do it.
I don't think I have.
Maybe give them out at your next show.
Yeah,
so people have something to look forward to.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, it's a new year. We've got a new batch of memberships. But yeah, I don't want to do it at the end of a show. I want people to have like the whole show to play with their toys.
Yeah,
so
exactly.
We'll do it next time. Yeah.
Yeah. That sounds awesome.
Absolutely. Alrighty. Thanks everybody so much for joining us. Thank you so much, my good friend Mark. It is always a joy.
Oh, my pleasure.
Yes. And as always, remember, you don't have to go through a long philosophical diatribe about what the meaning of a Greek word is so that you can make a case that the thing didn't happen to the other thing and therefore God, because you are better than religion. Good night.
Just like a spark that's breaking out, can't make a stop.